Hey, the writer's room is now open. What's up, my boy? How you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you doing, man?
I am great. I just checked the morning news, and I was just kind of going through Discord, and I realized now that the Peter Pan trailer just came out. Um, and as you could see just from a preliminary look here, 215,000 dislikes to 32,000 likes. People are saying some awful shit about this. I've seen a couple of hints at it so far. I've watched Critical Drinkers take already,
Oh boy.
but we'll go back over that one because I want to hear his full thoughts because I was only
Yeah.
reading it at the time. I was only reading closed captions. I wasn't actually
I
listening.
also haven't seen it either.
So we're gonna watch that too. But Corridor Crew also dropped something interesting. We were just discussing how shot composition and creative license in terms of being able to do practical effects in shows and how important it is to see good practical effects. So, we're going to compare Peter Pan's Wendy official trailer to practical effects that like Corridor Crew does. We're also going to watch their new rock paper scissors anime thing, which apparently was generated all by AI.
Okay.
But let's
Tell
watch
me,
this in poor quality
how did
apparently.
you come to Neverland?
If you're
Okay.
pushing audio, I can't hear it.
Oh, shoosh. That's right, because I'm streaming the screen and not the application. Here, hold on. Everybody else can hear it, but you can't. um, let's see. Can you see that?
Yes. Yep, we're good now.
Are you?
Lost Boys.
Every last one of us.
But you're not all boys.
So?
Oh
What
boy.
is this?
Okay. First problem. We literally just discussed this earlier. But Peter Pan's original writing, the purpose of Wendy being the only female against a bunch of boys is to reinforce the point that you can't stay a young boy and do whatever the hell you want and go play in the woods. You have to eventually grow up and mature. You can't be a dumb idiot.
Yeah, as much as I may want to have a compound in the woods, I'm not allowed to.
At
I mean,
least not
joking.
one with all boys, because
No.
you will do dumb things.
I don't know if I put a. Nope, I'm not going to say that. Never mind.
It
Might be a bit much.
might be a mid bunch. I don't know. Twitch might give you a little shit for that.
Yeah, so I was like, you know what? Never mind. But there's also the whole point of essentially, from what I vaguely remember, because it's been a while since I've read the original story. Part of the reason in universe why they were all boys was essentially the boys were the ones who fell out of bed or were lured out of bed, whatever, and that's how Peter Pan got them. And essentially, the only reason Wendy was brought to Neverland in the first place was because she was paying a lot of attention to her younger brother, who was I think like 6 or something,
Yeah,
and then
and this
she
is
got swept up in
also
it.
reminder. This is also occurring during World War I. I think is the time setting.
I'm
Or
actually
World
look
War
that up. I'm
Two.
not sure.
Like London was being bombed. They would go into the bomb shelters. Was what
Hmm.
they would do. And
Oh, if you ever want to, oh, go ahead.
yeah, no, go ahead.
If you ever want a fun read, the ghost stories that like Londoners would make up, um,
Yeah,
just throughout the Blitz. There was one. What was it? It was like Bomb Crater Jack or something, and it was essentially this dude who would wait out when the bombs were falling and everyone had ran to the shelters, and he would break into people's houses and steal things. And if you'd found people killed by the bombs, he would essentially eat them.
interesting. But I mean, like that's some of
Yeah,
the
there's a
horror
whole bunch.
stories that come from that. But like the story of Peter Pan specifically had to do with making sure young boys would go to bed on time and listen to their mothers. That the importance of femininity and the maternal instinct to protect those younger than you, and the
Yeah.
importance of family and having a structure in your life, and that family didn't necessarily need to be related by blood. That was another thing
Okay.
that's brought up in it.
So the original Peter Pan came from a a novel called The Little White Bird by Scottish writer J.M. Barrie, published in 1902.
So World War One.
Uh, that would have been 18 years before. Well,
18 years.
12 years before.
12 years before World War.
Yeah. Peter Pan, center of the stage play Peter Pan or the Boy Who Wouldn't Grow Up, premiered as a play December of 1904.
1904. So it even predates World War One. So the adaptation that Disney did was still something different by the time it got to that point. And it
Yeah.
had matured somewhat from that position. But it's always been kind of a fable tale, essentially. It's supposed to instill some sort of moral into you. So far, what I've seen is we've deconstructed any moral of family and femininity because we're going to make the Lost Boys not all boys. Which I guess you could say maybe young girls also need to listen to the same advice in some way. Like, I'll play devil's advocate here.
Yeah, I'm not gonna disregard that immediately. It would depend on how they essentially
Play
convey
it
that
out.
message and yeah, continue through with it. But at the same time, one of the purposes of a trailer is to get you interested in seeing the movie in the first place. I may not, talk endless amounts of crap about the movie, but at the same time, if the trailer doesn't hook me, I'm just not going.
Yeah, it's that simple. Like, why would I want to go if the trailer is garbage? So far,
Mhm.
it's replaced something that was fairly key to the point of the title. So we'll see how the rest of it turns out.
This place. It's home.
Peter found it. Just like he found all of us.
Just like he found me. Peter Pan?
Were you expecting someone else?
Pause for a second. You might be having an issue with Opera because it keeps the video on my side keeps phasing in and out.
Well, you know what we can do to fix that? We can switch to Chrome because Chrome is different. Chrome doesn't do this, which is weird.
Well, I have the same problem with Brave too.
You know what it is Opera GX does a good job at making sure people can't see things you're not supposed to see.
I mean, I'll appreciate that.
So getting going here. Once I love this changing of windows all the time. So it's so fun. You can see that now, right?
Yes.
All right. So we're at the 40-second mark here. We'll go back
Okay.
to like the 25-second mark. Go from there. But before we continue, so Disney's about 100 years old now,
Mm-hmm.
which is impressive. But do you think at this point in age, Disney has become completely out of touch with what they're supposed to be doing?
So I guess that depends on what your opinion of what they're supposed to be doing is.
They're supposed to be making
Like-
entertainment. Let's be fair, right? It's their job.
I would boil that down further to essentially just making a profit. Just entertainment is how they do that. The medium, essentially.
Gotcha. Okay.
You know my position on businesses and business morals.
Yes. They have none.
Essentially.
It's been a pain in the butt. Oh, it's click on.
Okay, so the kimchi's been in my fridge for about 4 days. We'll see if it's still good. I hope so.
I would hope so too. I hope we don't get sick from it. That would
Eh.
suck.
It's kimchi. It'd be worth it.
It's kimchi. It'd be.
I actually really like kimchi.
I do too, but I don't think I'm quite that level. Then again, I'm not really sure. I might be wrong,
Yeah.
but trying to reduce the size of our pictures here to
Yeah.
mention. There we go.
Admittedly, it is also rather impressive that any company, Disney, whatever, has managed to last 100 years essentially without being bought out or absorbed by another corporate entity.
Yeah, no, and I agree with that. That is definitely a positive thing in terms of that. But I
Mhm.
think Disney's finally kind of hit the point where they have failed to grasp their entertainment industry anymore, and they're no longer trying to make entertainment, and that is where they're losing people. But anyways, let's keep going.
What is this place? It's home.
Peter found it. Just like he found all of us.
So, the thing I've noticed so far is that every single one of the Lost Boys so far is the exact same Lost Boys, except for the twins.
Yeah, that's fair.
It seems like they changed the twins to being the girls.
It's one of those things where
Peter Pan.
Also, it's the person from Narnia.
it's one of those things where I have that issue where if you're going to essentially, for lack of a better word, diversify a story for whatever reason, I tend to respect the effort of making an original character that fits with the setting significantly more than tweaking an existing character.
I agree. I much prefer that.
Who's from Narnia that you were saying?
Wendy. Wendy is the girl from Narnia.
Oh, like the youngest sister?
You're not all
No, I think it's the older one.
No, that's the structure of the eyes and eyebrows is different. That's not Anna Popplewell.
It isn't?
No.
Yeah, let's see. Alright.
Because she was in
boys?
Forward Unto
So?
Dawn. That was really good.
Yeah, it's totally the twins. The twins are the ones
Yeah.
that they...
What is this place? It's home.
Peter found
Okay.
it. Just like he found all
She
of
looks
us.
extremely the same.
It's like he found me. Peter Pan?
Were you expecting someone else?
At least they kept his
What you
top
say,
hat.
boys?
Yeah.
You ready for an adventure? It looks very far away.
It's very clear that this is based off of the original animated that they did.
Yeah. Which, not necessarily a bad thing, but
I think it's very good. But-
continuous dilution of the story, essentially.
Yeah, but it's like, if you're gonna continually recreate something, you have to do something inventive.
Yeah.
I think that's like the
I've-
biggest thing.
Minor note, nothing against the actor, but whoever is playing the older of the two brothers, I don't know if it was something with that shot, but he just triggered the uncanny valley for me, and I was like, ah.
It's closer than you think.
Peter Pan gives me the uncanny valley.
Yeah, but that actually fits the story.
There! Look!
What is it that you're afraid of, my love?
Perhaps I don't want to grow up.
Hold the past in your heart, but where you go from here, it's up to you.
The changing of Tinkerbell is the thing that a lot of people are like, okay, that's just a race swap for a race swap purpose. I don't necessarily care, but if Tinkerbell doesn't have any personality like she does in the animated series or any of the other versions, because almost every other version of Tinkerbell, she's attitude. She's
Yeah.
pure attitude. She does not have an attitude, I'm going to be so disappointed.
Wendy, Moira, Angela, darling. Where is Peter Pan?
I don't see no crocodile.
So far, no, but it's a trailer, and we're only a minute 44. I would have put the crocodile like after the Disney logo, to be honest.
Yeah. Like, or somewhere in there to reference it, at the very least. Oh. Peter Pan
I'm
and
just
Wendy
like-
unites the internet. Disney panics from Yellow Flash.
Huh?
Oh boy.
And I'm just And I'm just over here like, what kind of monster is autoplay on?
Well, you see, autoplay does a lot of crazy stuff. Right. Um, so here's the thing. We'll look at the Critical Drinker's take on this as well, because it was watched through.
Another day.
Because he's got a 5-minute video on a minute 44 trailer. Why not?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the YouTube reviewers, which I
from-
guess we're piggybacking off of, are really good at that.
Yeah, well,
We're
I mean,
piggybacking off of piggyback.
yeah,
like us.
I mean, we're discussing it. We're the writer's room. We got to discuss the writing here. So far, the shot composition that they've presented is pretty mediocre for the most part. It's a lot of action-packed scenes. It's very live-action oriented of being able to give epic volume to the scenes that they're trying to portray. So far, it seems like they are following the same composition that they were in the animated, original animated, from Disney itself. What they've
Yeah.
changed so far is just character traits, but not the story in any way, shape, or form. They're not adding any depth to it. If anything, they're
I'm
taking
moderately
away.
curious. I'm moderately curious how they're going to handle essentially the Native American tribe, because even that was a bit extreme when that movie came out.
Yeah, it was. And it was. And the thing is I don't know how to feel about that one in particular, especially since the particular portrayal of the Indians in that case was a representation to say that this is a cultural difference, and expressly being an American cultural difference. People who are complete foreigners to those who lived in the UK. These people are absolutely foreigners to them. They have no idea who they're like.
It's also a Scotsman. I assume an individual who had never been to the States, because it was 1900 and really not that many people traveled. Essentially writing about a culture that he'd only heard about in tales, for lack of a better word. And ultimately, I would reserve judgment depending on what they do with it could have interesting potential. But it's seeing that potential played out is enough to get my butt in seats.
I would say so. I think it would be interesting, but I have a pretty good suspicion that it's going to be mishandled quite spectacularly, because
Well, there's also a god.
But well, the reason why I think it's going to be mishandled quite spectacularly is because the quote unquote representation that they're going to give is going to be they're probably not going to pick a specific tribe of any type of Native Americans. And even then, the specific tribes that you could pick of Native Americans, there's no good tribe out there. All of them were warring nations with each other, especially the most major of them that existed long into the 1900s to begin with. The ones that had survived past that point were warring tribes who explicitly protected their territory from those who were expanding into it.
Yeah, and I mean, for lack of a better word, anyone who had managed to last that long had to fight for it, because everyone who didn't was either wiped out or assimilated. There's also, taking a step aside, there's a trope in writing where you essentially have I'm changing the word here. It's part of the trope. It's called magical black man, and essentially going to a ethnically different individual for some sort of mystical answer and stuff like that. And the Native American tribes can sometimes be portrayed in this way.
I think the more common trope that people refer to is spiritual journeys, usually, or adventurisms, where you will go to a foreign culture to seek mystical answers because you cannot find them in your own culture.
I mean, little did we know the British gap year culture just kept going and going and going.
Yeah, pretty much.
It just never went home.
It's just like the thing is that I'm concerned
Bullshit,
about
that's
it.
my career in
my concern is that the race swapping that they're doing is going to take away from the point of the Native Americans. The removal of it being all boys for the Lost Boys removes the purpose of them being the Lost Boys. Unless they can wrap that back around to children in general, to keep the moral
Hmm.
intact. Like,
Which could happen.
which if they do, then that's a successful journey in that. If they don't, it's a failure in the writing because you didn't
Yeah.
think through your writing process as to what you're trying to convey. If you're just trying to tell something entertaining, at least be as entertaining as fucking possible. But it doesn't seem as
mean-
entertaining as fucking possible if it's just the same Peter Pan story I've heard like
I was
60
about to say
times.
the animated trip was like the closest I could come. The animated movie was the closest thing I could come to a drug trip when I was like 6. So I'm gonna be disappointed if it's not like that level of crazy, and I don't think it is.
I don't think they can because it's live action. You're limiting yourself with your live action. Animation allows you to do things that you can't do physically.
Well, yeah, every sort of medium has limitations.
Yeah, but the thing is limitations help to build creative art forms. So if they're giving themselves this limitation, how are they going to get over those hurdles to make it entertaining? Let's
Could be
see what
interesting.
Critical Drinker has to say.
Another Disney live-action remake of a beloved animated movie. Because as we all know, nothing says creativity and imagination like retelling the same story over and over again without having to take the risk of coming up with something new and unproven. And when it comes to milking, sorry,
Okay, I think he summed it up pretty nicely in that part as to what he meant. I don't think we really need to discuss our thoughts. I think we've given those, right?
Yeah.
All right.
exploring old properties with strong followings and name recognition that guarantee a good return on investment, Disney truly are the masters of the trades. First,
That's the thing. It's like, that's not what they've done in the past, though. The golden age of Disney was taking original folk tales and putting them in animation to
Yeah.
tell creative stories and taking the creative liberties with it enough to tell children's stories, more specifically. The more modern Disney has gotten, we've noticed that they wanted to take the entertainment business by storm by giving high quality CGI. They wanted to update themselves to being able to produce really good artistic pieces using their old IP.
Yeah. But they also had a frankly wonderful, if short-lived, run with original stories as well. Or, well, I guess not necessarily original
let's take
stories,
one
but
of the most
adapted.
iconic original stories ever created by Disney, Treasure Planet.
So I'm gonna ding you there and actually say that's not an original story.
It is by the context of how they told it. Treasure Planet
I could
is based off of the original Treasure Planet,
Treasure Island.
Treasure Island, sorry. However, it's done in the sci-fi setting that has a unique basis of story that has almost no connection to the original Treasure Island.
Yes, but the story, and this is not a criticism, the story and the characters are almost beat for beat as they were in the books, which isn't a bad thing because it kept the whole plot of the story intact and as it went forward. It's just for a given value of original, shall we say? Like, don't get me wrong, I love the aesthetics. I almost, yeah.
Yeah, it's okay. So, Black Cauldron.
Black Cauldron's great, but Disney won't ever acknowledge it. I'd love that movie.
It's a great movie. It's a brilliant movie, and it's a great synopsis on how to write a good D&D campaign. We might talk about that at some time eventually, as to the writing of a D&D campaign based off the Black Cauldron and how it basically mimics the original versions of RPGs.
That would be a lot of fun. Also,
If we get
and this
time, we
is-
might do it.
brief interjection. Black Cauldron, great story. It's a bit more mature, a lot more grim than the average Disney fare, which I think is part of the reason why they won't talk about it. But my absolute favorite part is essentially the princess that he goes off to rescue.
Yeah.
And he gets there, and she's not in her cell. She's essentially roaming around the castle, popping out of the walls like some sort of tunnel rat.
Mhm.
She's
She's
essentially already escaped, and she's now trying to go forward. Black Cauldron was, however, also based on a book.
As far as I know, it is based on a book, but it doesn't actually quite reference the book. It's just the source material as to like, okay, here's the concept for it.
Oh, it deviates quite significantly.
Like it's fairly original in its concept.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah.
what
Black
is
Cauldron's great.
the other? Oh gosh, what is some of the other original Disneys that are out there? Uh, I know the Toaster isn't an original one because that actually has a book, but I think the book technically came out after, but it was written before, but it wasn't published. That's a weird context for that one, but
Yeah.
there's so many. There are good Disney originals. You know what? Now I'm gonna actually look this up. Let's look at the list of actual Disney originals before we go back to Critical Drinker. Um, is
Yeah, if you put Disney and original, you're just gonna get all the original source material, except for this one thing from Korra that is kind of interesting.
okay, so there's a lot of them. Um, these are all technically produced by Disney. Ron is a Disney original?
Did they own the rights originally, or did they just buy them later? I don't know.
Wonder if
And now I am thinking of Korra. There we are in life.
Disney original. It's not based on a prior story. See the list. The Emperor's New Groove is partially based off The Emperor's New Clothing by Hans Christian Andersen. Darn.
Well, he also wrote The Little Mermaid.
Chicken Little. Lion King.
The Lion King is King of the White Lion.
It's
That's a
also
Japanese
referenced to be based on Hamlet, supposedly.
I can see
Fantasia.
that.
Fantasia.
Fantasia was fun.
Dinosaurs.
I couldn't tell you what actually happened in Fantasia.
Dinosaur, Brother Bear, Home on the Range, Atlantis. Atlantis is an original. I didn't think Atlantis was original. I thought that there was a book on that.
Well, kind of in that Atlantis mythology mostly comes from Plato. And we're not really sure if he was just philosophizing, if it was him retelling a story he'd heard, or if he just made it up. We don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff around that, but I guess in a way it is an original story because it is telling an original tale about them finding Atlantis. Story structure around it is a completely different thing. It's not like it's referencing mythology, but a reference to mythology is still not a previous story per se. Just how like you could definitely say that like Hercules, the story, is an actual written story, but you could say like telling the story of like Kratos from God of War is pretty original.
No, yeah, fair. It's also worth noting that for Greek mythology wise, each of the gods had multiple cults, and so there were essentially different iterations of the stories depending on where you are, and a lot of stuff drawn together.
Yeah, I would definitely say so.
And then you have the dividing line between the Mycenaean Greeks and then, I guess, the ancient Greeks, and then the Greeks as they are now.
Exactly. That is actually true. There's a lot in history that delineates different periods and ages, especially when it comes to mythology and the modern interpretation there from which they come. Wreck-It Ralph is apparently an original. Lion King is considered questionable.
I could see Wreck-It Ralph. That was actually quite good.
People would say Frozen, Incredibles, Aristocats, Lady and the Tramp, 101 Dalmatians, Toy Story, Up, maybe Aladdin.
No, Aladdin is at least partially based off of Alibaba and the 40 Thieves.
That's what I thought too. Somebody had
Nights?
said Frozen, but that's based off of Snow Queen by Hans Christian Andersen. Aristocats was
Yeah,
based
also,
off of Tom Gorian. 101 Dalmatians
also
was
coming
Dottie
from,
Smith.
Frozen also comes from Snegoroshka from Russian mythology,
Oh.
which
Yeah,
explains a lot
somebody
about the
said
Russians when you think about it.
Arabian Nights as well too. There really isn't a lot that doesn't have some sort of source material necessarily, except for maybe The Incredibles.
The Incredibles was really good.
And The Incredibles is a fantastic story, and actually probably one of their best IPs they've ever had. And all the movies that have come out for The Incredibles, I've actually liked.
Was that a Pixar thing and then they got bought out by Disney?
I believe so.
Or okay.
I believe so because Pixar is the one who always makes mommy butts really big, right?
You're not wrong. Also, given our discussion last week about somewhere between Azula and Shigo, I would like to add a third woman to that one. Then
Okay.
that would be Helga from Atlantis.
Ooh, ooh, good choice. Good choice. Very good choice. Wait 1 second here.
No worries.
Reactor online, sensors online, weapons systems online, all systems normal.
Back to the Raiders room. Okay, we're back. I just had to take a quick phone call because that's life. Phone calls happen. But coming back to what we were talking about here, yeah, Helga from Atlantis, absolutely. Also, an example of a strong female character. It's actually pretty cool. I might bring up the Nuxtaku video on that actually because he made a series on pissing people off by calling out what is a good female character and what is a bad one.
Oh, that sounds like fun.
So if we got time, we'll get into it. We've got Black Cauldron on the list now, so we might throw that in on the end. But kind of going back over this really quick, there aren't many things that Disney does that isn't based on something. Like there are very, very few products that you can find out there, even by any movie release of any kind, that is a truly original to picture only release. The reason for that is because stories have to be told and enjoyed before you can try to put them to film, because generally you want to have a starting point. Stuff.
It's also a big investment financially.
It's a huge investment, so why would movie studios do anything that isn't proven? Which should be something that you should keep in mind when you look at stuff like this. So let's go back to the critical drinker.
You had Beauty and the Beast, then you had Aladdin, then you had The Lion King, then Mulan. Well, now get ready for Peter Pan and Wendy, a reimagining of the classic children's story by Scottish author J.M. Barrie about a young British girl named Wendy who travels to the magical world of Neverland with the swashbuckling hero Peter Pan and his gang of lost boys, only this time updated for modern audiences. And it's about time too. Sure, the original story might be widely regarded as a literary classic that reshaped the landscape of children's storytelling,
which it did, and it won.
Yeah.
It won something around the range, I believe, of 17 awards in literary writing in the year that it came out. It was a redefining version of children's stories. And that's not to say that like, oh, it earned a lot of awards, so therefore it's a very good story. It earned a lot of awards because it was very challenging at the time to literary writing as to what people were already producing. That's the reason why it's so important to keep in mind.
And honestly, up until people really discovered how profitable the older teen, young adult demographic could be, children's and young adult stories, for lack of a better word, was not a huge financial cornerstone, at least for movies.
Yeah.
sensitively dealing with complex ideas like the inevitability of aging and the loss of childish innocence, the power of imagination and belief, and the importance of ultimately moving on and growing up, but it's also deeply problematic, enforcing damaging stereotypes and outdated ideas that we just can't allow to exist these days. They must be removed at any cost. And if the recent trailer that got released is anything to go by, I'm confident that today's fine scriptwriters have done a fantastic job of fixing these problems. Like The Lost Boys, for example, which by their nature were sexist and exclusionary. Yeah, the origins of the Lost Boys in the novel were actually a subtle compliment to female intelligence and sensibility, since in the words of Peter Pan himself, the Lost Boys were babies who fell out of their prams, while girls were far too clever to let something like that happen to them. And all of this was tied into the overarching theme of Wendy, a girl, being a mature and steadying influence on the group, ultimately bringing them to the realization that they couldn't remain as children forever, and that it was time for them to go home and live full and complete lives at last.
If I also remember correctly, her mother is dead. Is part of the reason
Yes.
why she took such a maturing role in this instance. Is because during this time, her mother wasn't there.
That was my understanding, is she was dead and the father was absent by virtue of essentially
Needing to work.
needing to provide. Yeah. Also, the dog was named Nana and she was adorable.
Yeah, absolutely. I am responding to people who are asking questions right now, so my Discord is now blowing up with people asking questions about it.
Oh boy.
But of course, that kind of subtle exploration of the different perspectives and outlooks of boys and girls, particularly in a story with a female protagonist, is dangerous and damaging because we need to be constantly reminded that girls can punch and fight and do adventure stuff too. And what's so great about the trailer is that it manages to work this change into the plot in a subtle, elegant and organic way, rather.
That's the other part, is that as a member of the Scottish community, as being somebody who is at least 50% Scots-Irish to be more specific, because I come from the region that's in between Scotland and Ireland, which is not England, by the way, if people don't know.
I was about to say the Isle of Man.
Correct, actually. That is
The only reason I know that is Crusader Kings.
Yeah, no, that is exactly where my original Hallmarks come from. But as somebody like that, I get to see constantly being erased out of media is just redheaded Scottish people. we're just not in film anymore. They just like love to remove us and just replace us with anybody else. Doesn't matter who it is. It just replace us. I guess we're the worst, even though we were the ones who were the original slaves to most of England.
I mean, to be fair, if we have you stand up against a white wall, you just disappear and we can't see you again.
This is true. This is true. I give sour cream and onion in its color. But anyways.
Rather than just trying to shove it in your face with some clumsy piece of cheesy dialogue.
But you're not all boys. So?
Nailed it. But what about
Nailed it like the Romans.
Oh man, nailed it to a cross and hoisted it up in the air and burned it.
Oh Jesus.
Like, oh my god. It's a bit morbid, but it's also true.
Yeah.
Yeah, by the way, if you didn't know, they burned Jesus.
Yeah.
Oh, good job, Romans. Good job.
about Peter Pan himself? Let's take a look at this classic roguish, mercurial adventurer for the modern age.
Peter Pan?
Were you expecting someone else?
Or how about Tinker?
Also, they gave him a short form cutlass rather than giving him a dagger like he's supposed to have. Which makes me upset.
Yeah.
Because there is
I don't feel strongly about it.
Here's the reason why I'm saying this, is because in the original story of 1901, the reason why Peter Pan has a dagger instead of a cutlass or anything else pirate-like is because the rogues, as he was considered, a rogue in this case, or a spy for the British Army, especially young men, would carry daggers with them. And those daggers were specifically issued by the Royal Military. And Lord Baden-Powell of the Boy Scouts of America specifically equipped all of his Boy Scouts, which supposedly Peter Pan was a representation of that, of the time, with daggers. And one of the stories that came out of the Boy Scouts that I distinctly remember is from 1905/1910-ish time, is a story of one of the lost scouts. And that lost scout was a kid with a dagger who would try and find his fellow members and lead them to paradise.
Mm-hmm. It is kind of funny, briefly going into the Boy Scouts, and essentially not just a place where boys can develop into men, but also cultivating the next generation of officers and scouts for the British Empire, as it was. It amuses me deeply that Lord Baden-Powell was doing that, and then Teddy Roosevelt was like, "This sounds wonderful. You can do it over here, or I'm just going to do it myself." It's like, all right.
1901 to 1910. That's when the development of the Boy Scouts happened. The original United States Boy Scouts started in 1910. The original Boy Scouts themselves started in 1901.
And from a very hilarious perspective, technically speaking, Boy Scouts are paramilitaries.
They are. They're also congressionally charged with a charter. They are the sixth line of defense in the United States.
Things have gone really wrong at that point. But I would also point out that there were examples of scouts essentially serving in combat roles throughout World War I and a bunch of the other wars. Poland especially comes to mind.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be frank, like, scouts in the military, very specifically, were given to young men as their original jobs before World War I, and it was very specific to the fact that Lord Baden-Powell witnessed this in his tour in Africa, and noted that the African tribes out there would have these young boys do this to gain experience in hunting, gathering, foraging, learning all the basic concepts and skills they need for survival in case anything were to ever happen to them or their family.
Yeah, and from a somewhat morbid perspective, this practice has persisted not just in tribes and the transition towns and all that, but also within pirate groups and insurgent groups and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Because ultimately, in a lot of ways, young boys can go a lot of places where grown men can't.
Exactly. Because they have the innocence of childhood.
Yeah.
It is one of the harboring factors that's important and integral to a story that you're telling about this, and I'll make a reference to my book, actually. Very specifically in this case, if anybody wants a little spoiler here for the book, if you don't want that spoiler, you can leave now. Or you can just turn me off for the next at least 35 seconds. But very specifically, I mute them all the time,
it's fine.
Very specifically in this case, the children in the Bloody Baron series, the kid who grows up to become a scout soldier, very specifically, his intent there is that he's a young kid who has the capability of getting into enemy territory and being seen not as a soldier, but rather as somebody who's a rebellious child who will be treated more favorably by an enemy, as they would underestimate him and his capabilities. But yeah, let's get back into the video.
Tinkerbell, the fairy who helps and guides Wendy, but also has an unrequited crush on Peter. Now, you might remember her from the 1950s animated movie, or the 1990s movie Hook, or the 2003 movie. Well, let's see how she's looking in 2023. Ah, just like I remember. It really silences those critics who claim that modern Disney remakes are just lazy race and gender swaps of established characters in a vain attempt to pander to minorities, often disrespecting the cultural heritage of the source material. Take that, haters! Personally, I expect the objects of...
Again, written by a Scottish man.
Wasn't there a black fairy in like the expanded cartoons? That I
Yeah,
vaguely
but in
remember?
the fairies have their own culture and group. Like
I never
Tinkerbell,
actually watched it, so I couldn't tell you one way or another.
like unbelievably, I know this because I grew up with cousins who really liked the fairies from Tinkerbell and watched the Tinkerbell like TV shows. Yes, there are black fairies. There absolutely are. They don't come from this region at all. They come from the respected region in the Southlands of Fairyland. And the Southlands of Fairyland are much more reminiscent to uh, Middle East and Africa in total, and even parts of South America. That region is completely specific to that. Because it's supposed to be a cultural heritage to those regions, and that they represent summer in those regions. Tinkerbell is a representation of spring and the joys of youth, and the reason why she shows up in Peter Pan for those specific purposes is because that spirit of spring helps to give Neverland its infinite island tropicalness, always being
Yeah,
nice out.
they're essentially persistently trapped in, I guess, the land of spring. Never mind the interesting Fey culture
It comes with it.
from like Scotland and Ireland,
Mm-hmm.
and Queen Mab and the lands of winter.
Exactly. And it's supposed to be an idyllic paradise that they're searching for in the northern highlands of Scotland. It's the whole
Have
Greenland thing. Greenland, Iceland.
have you, have you ever read Dresden Files by chance? I know we're never going to get through this video at this rate, but
But I mean, it's the writer's room. This is what we do. Uh, I have only partially read them. I think I've only read like the first few chapters of the Dresden Files, but I've never finished it.
so I enjoy them quite a bit. But essentially, the Fey courts become a major proponent of several books, and Tinkerbell essentially working to trap mortals in this land of always spring is actually very in line with some of the gambits the summer court might do.
Exactly. So, you know, way to way to way to fuck up mythology and erase white history, which is it's not even necessarily even white history. It's just Slavic history in Northern Ireland and all the Scots and all the Dales and all the people who come from those regions. From some of the most progressive countries in the world, that's whose culture you're erasing. Think about that.
Yeah, it's
Nice,
frustrating.
nice job at being culturally insensitive.
Nah, it'll be fine.
Tinkerbell's
It'll buff.
affections will turn out to
It'll
be
buff
Wendy
out.
this time around, but maybe I'm just crazy. Actually, talking about Wendy, you might remember from the original literature and the animated movie that Wendy becomes a kind of maternal figure to Peter and the Lost Boys, helping to maintain their home and teach them manners and discipline that they lacked before, and that even though she got captured and had to be rescued by Peter, she represented something far more powerful even than him. The ability to leave behind the childish ignorance of Neverland and grow up, to make a real life for herself and become something more than she was, and that this ability is ultimately what helps the rest of the Lost Boys to leave Neverland behind and return to the real world with her. But that's not the kind of subtle thinking that we encourage in modern writing. Instead, we need to show Wendy as an ass-kicking, sword-fighting girl boss who can take on two of Captain Hook's pirates at the same time and fight almost as well as Peter himself. Because, as we all know,
girls get it done.
honestly, I think this movie looks like a fantastic addition to the Disney Plus lineup, really honouring the legacy of one of their most iconic films from the classic era of animation, and if the stellar trailer reception is anything to go by, audiences are gonna absolutely love it. And I can't wait to see it happen.
I saw that.
Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.
So,
It's Velma time.
oh god,
God.
no nuts.
Kill it with fire.
Kill it with
Kill it
fire.
with fire.
Yeah, like how not to write a female.
Their own merit.
Ah!
Yo, new series. That's
All right. So what did you think of that? What are your thoughts? What are your
Oh
final
boy,
thoughts?
We're still on Wendy and all that. Cautiously, I'm not going to condemn it out of the gate.
So far, his
I'm also-
representation of the trailer obviously makes it look really bad because he's pointing out the very
Yes.
specific bad things. But that's his job as
Yes.
a critical drinker, is to point out the bad thing. But in this case,
That's part of his brand, and then there's also a certain amount of draw from essentially accentuate the negative
yeah,
in a lot of YouTube commentary, which isn't a bad thing, but
reviewing the actual trailer versus what he said, I think it's not quite as bad as he says, obviously. But the very specific instances of what seems to be the erasure of Wendy's character itself and her representation in the story will completely defeat the purpose of even making this movie. I think that's
if
going
the
to be where
purpose
it
is to make
loses it.
money, if the purpose is to make money over tell a good story, that it may not. We'll see.
Yeah. And that may be the
Um,
case, but let's keep in
possibly.
mind, most of the times that they've done this, it has not turned out that way.
That's fair.
And being that it's a live action, it's a more expensive movie to make.
Why do we keep doing that?
It's actually rather
No.
funny if they went back to the original, let's say, art styles of original Disney and tried to make films in those vein and do the animations in those vein, they would be much cheaper movies than any live action they could produce.
Maybe.
If
I
they
would have
went
to
back
actually look
to
at the financial
Project
background.
Blue, let's say they go back to something like Project Blue, which was how they created Tarzan, which is one of their most expensive animation movies of all time. The modern technology that we have today would absolutely make it cheaper to produce.
Mhm.
And Tarzan looks great, even today.
He really does.
So this is my issue in particular with animation, is that I think we've come to the headway where good storytelling and solid animation should be paired together to prove the point that you can make more profitable movies. And I think animation studios are pushing too far for good quality animation, which is too expensive, and trying to really push the fold in terms of like getting things to be realistic and overly drawn. Well, I do enjoy a lot of that stuff, like Love, Death, and Robots, and the amazing animators who do Love, Death, and Robots, and their short stories. I think that coming back to a more original art form and bringing that to life with really original works of stories, long-term TV shows that use animation in a high-quality fashion with their stories would just
So
be
I don't
cheaper.
know. Maybe I would have to actually look at the financial breakdown back and forth. I'm always going to be a kind of person that prefers two-dimensional, well-drawn two-dimensional art over 3D. That's just kind of how I am.
And I feel I'm the same way too. There is, however, an exception I make.
Okay.
Titan AE.
Never seen it.
So,
Is that which one is that? Not Titan AE, but the Star Trek ship.
Star Trek ship? Which Star Trek ship?
When you opened the new tab, it was your background.
Oh, that is the Enterprise. Enterprise E.
That's E? Okay.
NCC 171E.
Yeah, I have the NX-01 and then the NX-01 refit we never got to see. I have both of those on my shelf.
Nice, very nice. As you can see, we're nerds and we love good stuff. Titan AE. Let's see. There it is.
Yeah.
This is a good mix of 3D and 2D.
I could see that, yeah. Hey, it's Stellaris.
Pretty much. Fantastic movie, highly recommend.
Alright, I may have to put that on the list then.
If you've never seen this movie, I highly recommend it. Maybe we'll do a watch together on this at some point.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
This is a Disney movie.
Oh, alright, fair enough.
This is also in the Forgotten Shelf, like Treasure Planet is.
Yeah.
This plays much more to the Treasure Island theme.
No, I can definitely see that.
It's not in 4K.
It definitely has a soundtrack.
Also, best girl in all of animated. And some of the coolest spaceships I've ever seen.
I feel like they're going for like an almost cloak effects with the aliens.
Mm-hmm.
But I almost feel like they're models where the textures haven't rendered.
Yeah, pretty much. Like, that's the thing, is like, the textures in this, it uses 3D animation to make the aliens uncanny in a way that makes them feel alien.
Which is not something that's done often enough, I would say.
The adventure begins.
Also, there's some really big names in this movie.
Titan AE, get ready for the human race.
Alright, that is going in my watch list. I have an actual dedicated watch list. It just grows.
But yeah, that's a little something for you. Something interesting. Hopefully that is an enjoyable movie other people will go watch, because it is a fantastic movie if you ask me. So let's jump into the next thing here. We'll do the next Taku, and then we'll do Black Cauldron. Talk about Black Cauldron.
It's definitely gonna get me canceled. I have never been more excited. I love starting new YouTube series that are gonna get me canceled. How to not write a female character. I'll tell you how this all started in a nutshell. Basically, I was saying that there's a lot of female characters out there that are really poorly written, and a lot of people are like, wow, that's sexist. I feel like this is
I should preface this. I was there for the stream that he was talking about this.
Fair enough.
Because I'm also one of the people who brought it up.
Yeah, I don't know. I have a hard time with VTubers. Just not the concept. It's something about how the way the actual model interacts on screen.
I will say,
it just freaks me the fuck out.
Nux didn't start VTubing until much more recently, and the only reason he started doing it is because of the uncanny valley effect it gives to people.
Yeah, fair
and
enough.
his characterization of his character, because he used to just do JPEGs of like different cuts of him making faces, just like how Gundam does his.
Yeah.
But he went to VTubing because he spent a lot of time with VTubers, and so he wanted to do a VTuber model and participate in that particular group. And I think he does a fantastic job of being the outlier among them in terms of a quality personality, somebody who isn't afraid to give their opinions clearly, and definitely represents the everyday person.
My knowledge of VTubers basically comes from one of my coworkers trying to get his wife to do it, and then he and I sending various whatever the Shark Girl one is,
Gura.
sending memes of that to one of our other coworkers who hates the entire concept and would just
and know he's the living
react
hell.
in the hilarious ways.
Absolutely fantastic.
It's just a really easy way to offend more people. So in every one of these videos in the how to not write a female character, I'm going to be talking about 4 female characters. 2 female characters that I think are written really goddamn well, and 2 female characters that are written really goddamn poorly. You can expect a lot of really goodies on this list. Oh, baby! In future episodes, you can definitely expect me to cover some characters from Fairy Tail, because I think Fairy Tail has a good mix of female characters written really well and female characters written really poorly. Dog, you can expect on the bad side all your Hinatas, your Sakuras, and that's not all. I'm also gonna cover Western stuff, baby. That's right, your Captain Marvels and your Velmas. Sheesh, I have a special episode just for Rey from Star Wars. And I also am very excited to talk about the well-written ones, because I feel like a lot of them don't really get respect for how well-written they are. So let's just jump right into it, and I want to start off with a well-written character. That's right, we start off with talking about wholesome topics. We're gonna talk about Velma later in the video. It's gonna be fun. But for now, I wanted to talk about Toph from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Now, if you look at Toph's character arc for just a moment, you'll see why it's so well written. Toph is a character who is given absolutely everything and help by everyone when she didn't need help. She is being treated like a cripple and like a prisoner because she's blind. She then decides to get to the point that she doesn't need help. She doesn't need anyone's help. And she'll start this massive journey on her own with her friends to save the world, fight in a war, you know, all sorts of crazy wacky shiz, where she eventually completes her character arc explaining to herself how it's okay to ask for help. It's a very cool and well-written storyline and story arc for a character. And as just a little detail, because I want to do an entire No One Understands Toph video at some point, I feel like it's so impressive how throughout the entire series you have like the gang forgetting Toph is blind and stuff, and that became like a whole running gag throughout the show that I'm gonna get canceled for saying that I like the gag that they forget. She's like, oh my god, is Nux pro ableism? And the fact that people treat her like a functional,
Like, oh my god.
I would.
So here's
So-
the thing. First things first.
You go first.
First things first. Go watch the damn show. Anybody who's not watched it, go watch the damn show so you can understand this. That's the first preface I always have to make. When he talks about good characters, go watch their shows. And with the bad characters, go watch their shows so you can understand what we're talking about in this. Because the biggest thing about what I've said before and why your writing is bad is you need experience. Don't just take our opinions. Don't just take his opinions. Don't just take anybody's opinions. Go watch it for yourself. Go figure this thing out for yourself. But anyways, you were saying.
It's one of those things where my opinion on Avatar as a series differs from a lot of people.
Ooh, we get a hot take?
Oh god. In that I do like it.
Okay.
However, oh god, this isn't gonna go well. I spent most of my time as a child rooting for the Fire Nation. And then as I grew older and I began to understand why, my opinion hasn't changed.
I will give my hot take on this. I will give my hot take on this. I think from a geopolitical standpoint, it absolutely makes sense what the Fire Nation did.
I could see that, and bringing in that level of geopolitics into a kid show isn't a bad thing, especially as a medium to teach it. The issue is
It's very subtle, and you won't get it until you're older. Until you've experienced a lot of geopolitics, too.
Yeah, that's true, which most people won't. Well, people will indirectly, but they won't realize it. It's one of those things you basically have to get slapped in the face with.
It's one of those things you also just have to research and discover.
Yeah. Essentially, I viewed the Fire Nation as, despite being as honor and tradition obsessed as they are, as the only people who were ever actually trying to build things.
Yeah, a lot of the other cultures, like the Air Nation more specifically, had the capability of working with others, but decided to go into isolation. Earth Kingdom isolated itself and tried to build up its own technology base from the inside and be exclusionary to others. The Water Nation was so separated from everybody to begin with that they pretty much didn't have access to information that they needed to, and destroyed themselves by giving the separation of the North and South Pole to begin with. So they were two separate cultures in it itself.
Oh,
the
they also
Fire
forgot
Nation
about the small people.
was very much, well, yeah, them too. They forget the rednecks. Which is another good point to make, is that there can be subcultures within culture.
Oh
And
yeah,
those
absolutely.
people can absolutely be undermined in that sense, and you can erase those subcultures by simply being isolationist. It's one of those reasons why it's important to understand other people and accept their
Mhm.
beliefs and values, but still hold your own.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that tolerance is more than just being able to, deal with somebody being different. Tolerance is also about being able to understand the purpose behind something, find value in it, and incorporate that into yourself. That's a part of assimilation. And that portion of assimilation is to be improving on your character in person. It's supposed to
Mhm.
be improving on your culture, improving on your benefit to everybody. It's a holistic improvement. Assimilation isn't necessarily what people think of it in history books that people talk about of, colonists coming to a foreign country and invading it and telling the people they can't practice what they practice anymore because
That's-
they say so. Part of the reason why sometimes they say you can't practice what you practice anymore because what you were practicing was human sacrifice. What you were practicing was murder. One of the
Yeah,
one
but
of the
that's
most
also going to be
common
an
things
interesting.
that like the Native Americans used to do is that they expected that every tribe around them would kill any babies, would kill any fully grown adults, and would kill pregnant women.
Mhm.
But they would take in kids of the age between 8 to 12 or so because they can be changed into somebody who can serve the tribe. That was a
Well, yeah,
common
because
thing.
tribal, sorry,
Yeah, no, go.
tribal warfare, when not strictly for resources, which to be fair is the root of almost all geopolitics and almost all xenophobia and hatred, but that's a different problem. Um, Tribal warfare at that level is almost always inherently genocidal.
Yeah, and if you don't believe us, go study the history on it, and you will find that is the unfortunate answer. But
Yeah.
anyways, continuing
Now,
on.
I do have a different hot take for you.
Okay.
I don't like Aang or Katara as characters.
I don't like early Aang, but I see where his character arc is. I don't like Katara as a character because I feel like she overshadows her brother in his character arc sometimes.
Yes, absolutely.
And I feel
I
like
would also
Sokka should have been given more to do with because as much as he was a comedic relief, he also had a very, very genuine story.
he did get more to do, especially in the second and third books.
But
A
the
lot
thing
of it was
is,
very
like,
a lot of it was very backseat to what Aang was doing, though.
yeah, which is fair. He is the main character. He is the
Yeah.
avatar.
And not to say that I don't think Katara or Aang are well-written characters; they absolutely are. I just don't like them.
Best character in Avatar, Iroh.
Oh, absolutely. But then
Okay.
you have to start choosing who number 2 is.
Yeah, but well, for me, number 2 is Sokka.
Yeah, Sokka, and then after him is I'm honestly gonna say Suki.
I'm going to say Toph. My number
Fair
3
enough.
is Toph. But this will be outlining why I think Toph is such a good character.
Member of society, and that is what makes her feel most comfortable. She was more comfortable around the people that forget she's blind and that treat her just like a human being than being around the people that are tiptoeing around her and making believe she doesn't even exist because she might be able to be used as a weakness against the very rich and esteemed Beifong family. What a beautiful and fantastic character arc for one of the most badass, powerful, and fantastic characters in the series. And guess what? She's also a woman. Being female in this show as this character does not change her character arc even a little. She has her funny feminine moment. She's running across the bridge over the water and she's sinking and she can't swim. Well, she's blind, so that makes sense. She doesn't even know what direction up is. And Tsuki jumps in and saves her and she's like, "Oh, Sokka, you saved me." Oh, and then gives Tsuki a kiss and Tsuki's like, "Oh yeah, it was me. It wasn't Sokka." And she's like,
Well, You can go ahead and let me drown now.
Now that's a funny gag that would only work for a female character, and it works absolute wonders. It's a funny scene. It's a great moment. Being female is not the prime directive of writing Toph. Writing Toph was character first, gender second. And you'll notice that throughout this video and this series, that becomes the major flaw when it comes to modern day writing of female characters. A lot of the time they're just like, oh, we want a female character, so now let's figure out what this character's about that we've already decided.
Why is there a broad? I don't know. Anyways.
So let me point something out. Toph originally, when she was written in concept art, was a man. The original writers for Toph had her as a man. But then they said it's too generic. We want an interesting story. What if we make her a blind girl? Because then we can use this inserted lore that we've created for the Beifong family. They're an important household within the structure of, you know, the Earth Kingdom dynasty. They created lore around the concept of this character and built her out based on the lore and not on the characterization that she's female, not on the characterization that she's blind. None of that came into play. That was only part of the story. It was built around the concept of the lore first and building good world structure to the story. Because Avatar has good world structure.
Oh, absolutely. There is one thing I do kind of take issue in the essentially where story and world building intersects, and this is a problem I have with Katara and Azula and a bunch of others, is essentially so much of their character arc and trying to make them independent and all that relies on essentially this mode of, you know, divine given superpowers, for lack of a better word. It's part of the reason I will take Suki over Toph.
Because she's a non-bender.
Yeah, and she continues to do great things, not just despite, but in spite of.
Well, let's also take the particular, what's her name, Zuko's girlfriend.
Mai?
Mai is a non-bender, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, she just stabs people. It's great.
Yeah, like, she's a fantastic character, too, and they're a good parallel of the Fire Nation also accepting people of extreme talent and lifting people up who are meritorious in their society.
If Ty Lee wasn't so cheerful, she'd be terrifying.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
She has booba.
Like,
and the decision could be we're going to make her overpowered and epic because we want a badass female character. Or it could be she'll be a damsel in distress character because we need a female character. I hate the fact that the we need a female character comes first, and then it's like, okay, now we'll make them two-dimensional in this way or that way. We just need her to be female. That's really not the feeling that you get when it comes to Toph. Toph has such a rounded character arc, and she's such a powerful and strong character. She's not a character that's always being rescued by others, even though she definitely has her flaws. They're a team at the end of the day. Toph is one of the most powerful characters in the Avatar world. She comes up with metal bending, a completely new, unfathomably strong style of earthbending. And you don't see people throughout the story being like, Toph invented metal bending? And she's a woman. No one says that in the entire story because her being a woman is not necessarily relevant. It's the least sexist way of writing a female character. Writing a female character where everyone on the planet is just so impressed that, oh my god, a female character is doing these things is essentially equivalent to being sexist. Or at least that's the major purpose of writing that female character.
100% agree.
I would also point out, and this is not a critique of his logic or anything, Toph bringing out metal bending usually meant she was about to kill someone.
Yeah. When she basically discovered how to do it was coming from desperation, too. And her invention of it then gets credited later on. Like, they build statues to this woman. Toph Beifong is, like, one of the most iconic characters in Korra overall. Like, she is a building block of the mythos that goes into
She's also
later.
It's also interesting because, yes, she was blind, and yes, the helplessness associated with that, and then overcoming it with learning bending. I don't know if it was from the Badger Moles directly or if she just kind
Badger
of
Moles,
figured it
yeah.
out. But essentially, okay, she was essentially a natural prodigy at that, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But she had to struggle for mental bending.
Yeah, it was her training arc. She had to really struggle to get there, and she literally did it for like a week in a metal box while they were transporting her back to her family, and she learned it at like the last minute and saved herself. Now, this is an important one.
To being sexist.
I'm gonna
or at least
rewind
that's
it a
the
little.
major purpose of writing that female character.
You know, Amy, anytime someone calls attention to the breaking of gender rules, it ultimately undermines the concept of gender equality by implying that this is an exception and not the status quo.
Whenever I see a female character...
Knuckles.
Was that an official thing, or was that
That's
a fan
real.
thing?
That is real. Knuckles
I
is
love
the
that.
most woke motherfucker there ever existed. Knuckles
That's great.
is my favorite. Knuckles is brilliant.
All I can think of is the Ninja Raptor videos. In one of them, it's basically Knuckles pulls out a gun.
I'm fairly positive. I'm like 99% sure that came from the original series that they did for Sonic Adventures. Is where that came out of.
I was not aware they did one.
Yeah.
I
It was
just
on like
haven't paid
Disney
attention.
XD when I was a kid. Because I remember that line.
Okay.
It's fantastic.
That might have been roughly around the same point, not related to this, obviously. I stopped watching quite as much television.
Yeah. Kind of the time I stopped watching TV probably was around like 17 or 18. Because like I just had so many anime that I wanted to watch that I just stopped watching television altogether.
I made the shift into video games. Oh, but another really good female character. Number 362 from Kids Next Door.
Absolutely. Fantastic female
She's
character.
great.
Absolutely fantastic.
Where everyone's
Number 5
wowed
is
by
also
the
great.
little things that
Number
she does
5's
because she's a woman. I'm thinking...
Number 5 is my favorite of the Codename Kids Next Door.
It was always number 2 for me.
I've always liked number 5 the most in terms of female. The
number 86, despite being a really one-dimensional character in the beginning, really grew on me as well. And there is a woman I work with whose hair makes her look like she's wearing a colander on her head. And I've started calling her number 86.
Well, if anything, that should be a credit to her because number 86 is awesome.
She finds it hilarious, so.
And you know, the thing is like, appreciate the fact that you can be attributed to a character of some kind because most of the time those characters are way more badass than you are. Let's be fair. Like, way more badass. And to be attributed to somebody who looks like one, I think is always a compliment. Like, anytime that somebody is like, hey, you know, you kind of look like Ethan Hawke. Like, yeah, I'm a badass.
Wasn't number 86 like Mr. Boss's daughter? I think she was.
I think so? Something like that?
The really big dude who smoked a cigar. Anyways, we're getting into the weeds.
Yeah.
I'm now recognizing the fact that the reason why she's here and she's a character that strong is for that illicit sexist reaction. That's literally the point of the character, and it's not for Toph. Toph is just an extremely well-written character that happens to be female. And yes, her being female and lack of feminine in some moments definitely plays on that gag. She's always against going to the spas and stuff because, oh, I'm not a girly girl like that, bro. I'm just not like that. And she does at some point and she actually likes it. And that doesn't detract from her character at all. You want a female character that people respect, a female character that people want to respect because of her actual, you know, her character. Now, since I went ahead and talked about a very well-written, badass badass female character, I want to talk about a poorly written badass female character. I was thinking of talking about Sakura here, but I felt like it wouldn't be as good enough of a contrast because, to be fair, Sakura is not ever, even for a minute in the show, like, oh man, there's Sakura, look how she's a badass, the way she tells Naruto she loves him right after throwing him to the wolves. Let me first go ahead and talk about Asuna from Sword Art Online. Now, Asuna is a very badass character, and she does a lot of really cool things in Sword Art Online. I do, however, think they're overshadowed by the fact that they're like, okay, but she's a girl also, and she loves Kirito, who's lonely, brooding, and edgy. And this is especially apparent in the later seasons. If you're not caught up with the lore, I watched all of Sword Art Online. I know most of you probably stopped after season 1 or season 2. If you watched it at all,
I will
watch the abridged. It's great.
Watch the abridged. It's a better story.
Also, Asuna is great and possibly a psychopath, but
definitely a psychopath. But so is Kirito. But to be fair, I have watched every single episode of Sword Art Online and all of the movies, so I can say I am officially caught up on everything. So I can concur with a lot of the opinions here and give any reference or context that you might be missing.
I didn't even finish the first season. I will continue to watch the abridged version because I find it genuinely entertaining.
Indeed. But anyways,
I watched all of it, so I have the ultimate formulated takes here, and I think Sword Art Online is, are you ready? Mid. That's right, I'm not one of those epic Sword Art Online haters. In fact, I think Sword Art Online Season 1 was damn good. Asuna, on the other hand, is just not really a good character. She's introduced as this epic badass, and you definitely know that was what they were going for. They used to call her Lightning Flash Asuna. They based her nickname off Minato from Naruto. They're like, all right, who's the coolest freaking character we could think of? Yeah, we're gonna base, that's her nickname now. And she's definitely introduced as this badass character, and I do think she was somewhat badass, especially in the beginning. They go up against the first floor boss. She
certainly is not.
It's an epic battle. Kirito and Asuna battling it out. She's kind of a brooding lonester. He's
Itachi
kind
doesn't
of a
get
brooding
enough
lonester,
respect.
but he was just too brooding and too lonester for her. So he ends up ditching her, and she just joins a guild where she becomes extremely powerful and well known, and she falls in love with Kirito. This is where it kind of all goes a little downhill. There is no reason why she should be falling in love with Kirito. And of course, she knows that, which is why she's tsundere. The entire story in the first couple episodes, she's like,
oh my god.
I'm making you food because I think
just
you'll be
open the
hungry,
menu.
It's like, oh god, dude, we don't get up with him, and we don't know why. And it makes no sense, and you don't know why either. So you're covering it up with the tsundere thing. And then for no reason aside from the fact that he's like relatively
fine, then give me
badass,
the
she's
ones.
like, oh man, your sword is so
But I want the ones.
big. Oh. And then she kind of ends up just simping for him a lot. And he saves her because he's put into a position where
My
of course, he
numbers
saves
are
her. And
bigger
he's
than
just
yours.
epic like that. And then she saves him back because of course he's put into a position where he's almost dying because of her, and she likes him like that. And then oh, they kiss, and now they're married, and then they have a daughter, and then of course.
Here's the thing.
That whole thing escalated really quickly.
It does. It escalates really quickly. If you actually watch it through the first season is great with that. It actually seems really good. The second season falls off because it just gets into weird territory.
So the only reason I watched Sword Art Online in the first place was because a friend of mine pitched a fan fiction story to me that was Sword Art Online, but you're stuck in 40K.
Oh.
And I needed him to explain the whole thing.
You die in the game, you die in real life.
Well, we're all dead.
That's why it's so. It's when people say that Sword Art Online, because it was the one that really kind of introduced the idea if you die in the game, you die in real life. The scanners element of it. Which is totally what the reference is to, because it's a brain machine that will fry your brain if it'll literally cook your brain because it uses microwaves.
It's been so long since I watched Scanners. Oh my god, I forgot about that.
Yeah, but talk about a good movie. Watch Scanners, people. But the thing is that the romance story that is involved in Sword Art Online feels very forced in some aspects. But it is a very sweet romance story. It just feels like it detracts from the overall feeling that goes into it. But the reason why the romance is there is it's supposed to be the driving force for Kirito to continue to push through the game. This brooding, angsty asshole has to actually feel feelings and care about other people, which does a much better job in the abridged version of representing that, because you kind of have to be complete psychopaths to do the things that you're doing. In Sword Art Online, the show itself, it's represented as a wholesome story of love being the thing that helps to conquer the horrible aspects of it, and finding love in the worst places. Well, not the worst places, but more the darkest places. Even in this death game, you can find happiness.
It's interesting because with the abridged version talking about essentially you have to be a little bit of a psychopath for that sort of thing.
Yeah.
They actually touch on a concept I don't see very much explored, except for in the case of Warhammer, actually, with the Eldar War Masks, where essentially that not alternate personality, but that facet you have to put on to do some things.
Yeah.
And how you can get lost in that facet and turning it away. And sometimes that facet comes back when you don't want it to.
And the thing is that the later movies are actually very good at representing that specific feeling of putting on that mask and having to become the monster.
Wasteland also does a great job with that. Wasteland 3.
Yeah, Wasteland 3, absolutely. Let's keep going.
She has her cooking skill maxed out to 100. Yeah, of course, she's this epic fighter, but she's a girl too, guys, and she likes cooking too. Who let her cook? Well, she let her cook. Her character throughout the story is continually being pushed as a powerful character. Every time she's mentioned with reverence. I personally feel like all the badassery points that she builds up throughout the series and the reverence that she gets from the other characters by being some sort of high status, powerful person just serves the point that Kirito got the best girl. You see, all the girls in the show freaking love Kirito. He ends up like in trouble in Alice's Asian arc. He's like, bro, let's summon the harem. And they go ahead and summon all the girls throughout the story that wanted his. So all those women throughout, they all go ahead to save the day. And of course, Asuna leads the charge. And of course, Asuna even meets up with Alice, who's the character in the Alicization arc that of course falls in love with Kirito for unknown reasons because she's like this god level being. And she's like, yeah, but she's scared of heights. And Kirito protected her and she was scared of heights. Wow, this just became an entire tirade against female characters in Sword Art Online. I don't know how that happened. But anyway, eventually when she meets Asuna, they get into this whole
written
fight.
the same.
No, Kirito loves me more. No, Kirito loves me. You know, I like Kirito.
Kirito is mine, understand? Ridiculous. Be good from here.
When you want to write a badass female character,
Speak
step
on,
one,
thought.
make them badass. Step two, make them female. This was the other way around. It was step one. She's a female that's in love with Kirito. Now, how do we make Kirito more epic if she's also a badass? That is a formula for disaster, and that is why I think all the women in Sword Art Online, Asuna just being the main character, which is why she had the brunt of my hatred, that's why I think they're very poorly written. But when you want to write a female character, make them badass for their own merit. Don't make them badass just so that the dude that they love is cooler because he had the riz to nail him. On to, like, more general Western media.
No, boy. There's a lot of things behind you.
First, I want to talk about a really well-written Western media character. Now, a lot of people are going to be like, all right, Western media, female character, there must be lots of good ones. We have so many shows doing that stuff, you know? And the answer is yes. I could think of quite a lot of very well-written female characters in Western media. And a lot of really poorly written ones. So this part is going to probably be the more controversial area of the video. I don't think if I roast some anime waifu, they're like, bro, she's a waifu. Like, who cares? I'm going to do Velma for the bad one because that's easy. But for the good one, I want to talk about Kim Wexler from Better Call Saul. Now, as far as like career-driven female characters, most of them in like comedy
I never got
shows
into
really
Better Call
fall
Saul
flat. Now, Kim
slash
Wexler is
Breaking Bad.
everything that a female character needs to be. I think she's by far one of the most captivating characters in Better
I
Call
do like
Saul.
the noir
way that she
aspect
evolved
they're doing
throughout
right
the
now.
entire
Yeah.
story, breathtaking character development. Saul
That's
Goodman
something
is
we
one
see
of the
enough
best
of,
written
unfortunately.
characters in Western fiction, without a doubt. And you have such dynamic other characters like Mike that throughout the show are so captivating. Freaking Chuck is a ballad of fantastic character writing. Even someone like Howard or Lalo. The cast is stacked out of its mind with
Fine, I'll watch the
fantastic
show.
characters. And so
Yeah,
much of Better
you
Call
should.
Saul is the downward spiral. They have the whole meme, the Slippin' Jimmy meme. You know, you got Jimmy McGill, Saul's real name. Jimmy's this dude, Slippin' Jimmy. He'll always start falling. He'll always go back to slipping. And he has this relationship with Kim Wexler, someone who literally started from the bottom but made it up through the corporate world. And she's basically, without saying it, because thank God they didn't do this in the show, she's basically the best lawyer in the entire show. And you can see that by the way that she acts and carries herself and actually becomes a person of standing and repute through her actions. It's not like, well, Kim Wexler, even though she's a woman, she's the best lawyer in Better Call Saul. They don't do that at all. Thank God. It was a very show don't tell situation, which I respect so much. Being that Slip
that
We
word,
also don't see enough of that.
yeah, the show don't tell. Show don't tell. It should be something that should be ingrained on a wall and tattooed on your body if you're a writer. Show don't tell. It's just yeah. It's one of those things where good character writing comes from the ability to show a character's actions before you give them credit for those actions. It's the same concept of you don't win awards until you've won them. If you want to give a character credit for doing something already, show them doing it, and then give them credit additional to that. One of the basis for this is that if you're going to show any character necessarily that has some sort of reputation to them, like a high standing esteem, whether they're a noble, they're an expert craftsman of their trade, you show it in a way that represents their craft first and what they do by doing it, and then say, from the point of view of another character, like, hey, this guy's a master craftsman. This guy knows what he's talking about, or this girl knows what he's talking about. This character knows what they're talking about. They know what they're doing. That's the important aspect of show don't tell.
I would even take a step further when you're dealing with stuff like engineering, or, well, engineering's a big one, I'm going to say. If something is crafted by a character who is supposed to be a master craftsman, show that object in use in its intended purpose and how well it does.
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference between, hey, they made a bridge, this bridge looks really good, and then seeing things drive over the bridge.
Yeah, exactly. Anyways.
Ben, Jimmy, and Kim have some sort of relationship. She keeps falling back down into the mud with him. She loves and respects him, sticks her neck out for him time and time again. It causes her a lot of heartbreak. She ends up falling down this rabbit hole herself. She ends up getting in much too deep. She ends up causing something that winds up getting someone killed. And that is way too far. She just was trying to, flex on him a little bit. Things got a little too wild, and she really decided to change her life decisions going forward. She is a character that is so decisive throughout the entire show. She has a very interesting moral character that changes and fluctuates and flickers due to the actions that other people do throughout the story. And what's so fantastic is this career-driven, powerful person makes her own mind up and makes her own decisions throughout, ends up, spoilers for a little bit at the end, in a situation where she's so scared to make a decision. In the entire final part, like the second half of the final season, whatever she would do, you'd notice her indecisiveness. Every time someone would tell her, like, what do you want? And she'll say, well, I'll do whatever you want. She became a shell of her former self because of the regret and mistakes that she's made. She's not a character that was put on some sort of crazy pedestal that she's the best lawyer ever. She made mistakes like a real freaking person would, and she took accountability for her mistakes like a real freaking person should. Now that is a really, really well written female character. She didn't just purely act as a build-up for Saul's character, or someone to just be some sort of trauma or baggage for Saul. And goddamn, did she deserve all the awards she won by acting in that show. I want to move on now to Velma. She's a character that doesn't know what she is or what she's doing. Throughout the entire story, there are so many conflicting ideals throughout. That she's a person of color, and therefore she's being mistreated, except that's literally not the case at all. She's just insufferable. That she's ugly, and therefore no one loves her, which is not true, because Norval actually loves her for most of the show. And then when Norval has a girlfriend, Fred actually loves her. Yeah, that's right. On the behest of my rabid audience, I have been watching the entirety of Velma. I'm almost done, and I hate it. I hate it so much. Oh my god, it's so bad. She's a character that's trying to be meta and funny, but she winds up just disrespecting her own premise more often than not. It's like she's trying to show the idea that women that aren't conventionally beautiful should be respected anyway, because there's a serial killer that's only killing hot women. What? Is that really how you're trying to promote that concept or ideals, especially when you're a character that, most of the main cast actually falls in love with? And when I say most of the main cast, I mean Daphne thought she was straight until she met Velma. You're literally cucking your own lessons here at every possible turn. This is a character piece, a brilliant character story, making every character as insufferable and poorly written as you possibly can. I feel like every possible and potential agenda that this story could have when it comes to introducing characters and making them well written and trying to focus on some sort of social commentary, it ends up backfiring 100-fold and shooting themselves in the foot.
I thought lesbians were good at solving crimes. It's like the one positive stereotype perpetuated by cop shows.
All the problems that Velma, the person of color, the person that's not conventionally beautiful, the person that's overweight, the person that needs glasses, the person that's
not
totally
aware that was a
disabled.
trope in cop
Or
shows?
maybe I am for watching
I
this
didn't
much of
either.
this show. I'm gonna do a full series review on this show when it's done. I'm just letting you know.
Jesus.
I will.
7%.
Don't quote me on that in case I change my mind. It is really, really bad at the end. I still have like 2 episodes left, but god damn. So despite the fact that it's trying to be a commentary on all of these issues, it's not, because she has everything that she possibly could want. And it's not that she's a good person, except she's fat and that's why people don't like her. No, she's a horrible, vindictive, manipulative, disgusting person throughout the entire story. Of course people don't like her. It actively works its hardest to negate every possible social commentary it could possibly have. Now, as a rule, I don't love fictional stories that are jackhammered full of social commentary. But if they are, at least let the commentary part hit. And it didn't. I don't know who let the writers of this show cook, but I goddamn hope they get freaking annihilated with health code violations. So, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Please don't cancel me. How not to write a female character. I'm really excited for the series. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to future editions, where I can talk about how Daenerys is a well-written character in the beginning of Game of Thrones and a horribly written character by the end of the Game of Thrones show. I think that'll be honestly such
that's the
a fun
entire show.
episode of this too. If you want someone to just speak their mind and say the things that everyone wanted to be saying forever but are scared to. Twitter hates me anyway, so I'll do it. So subscribe to me. Like and subscribe. Do all of that. Share my stuff to everyone on the planet. Stay weird, fam.
Yeah, how to put this? I got into Game of Thrones in preparation for season 7 because someone finally managed to convince me.
Yep.
And that was not really worth the investment. And then I actually went and I read the books. And then I realized that why so many people really like Stannis from the books. Because, yeah, no, I can absolutely understand that. Stannis... Stephen Delane in the series did a fantastic job. So did Lean Cunningham and Clarice Van Houten. Essentially trying to do what they could with what was essentially an eviscerated storyline. They all did wonderful jobs.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Stannis in the series and Stannis in the book are very different characters.
Yes.
And because of how the book handles POV characters and their associated plot lines, by virtue of Stannis being so different, everyone who revolves around Stannis is very different.
I would agree.
Okay, I'm gonna go grab another beer. I'm still listening.
Yeah. In the meantime, however, we are going to jump to the Black Cauldron.
Black Cauldron's great.
Yes. Let's see if I can't find Black Cauldron. If I can spell it.
I'm officially out of beers. Now I'm just on seltzers, which is fine.
It's fine. You'll live.
Well, it's either that or half the bottle of Macallan I have next to my desk, and I'm kind of saving that.
Okay, let's review somebody's opinion. This one is from yeah.
All right.
Hello and welcome to Film in 5, where we review movies old and new to give you our thoughts on the films we've been watching here at More Movies. My name is David Roberts, and in this episode I'm going to be talking about The Black Cauldron, the 1985 animated feature that almost destroyed Disney's animation department. And just a warning that I will be talking about some of the plot points, so if you still haven't seen this classic movie, consider this a spoiler alert.
You've been warned.
The film is very loosely based on the Chronicles of Prydain, a pentology of children's high fantasy written by Lloyd Alexander. Our hero is
Didn't know that.
I did not either. Although, what is it with British children's books being written in a series of 5? It's either The Darkness is Rising or The Dark is Rising. That is a really good book series for kids.
Oh yeah.
That also leans on that old lore.
I remember reading that in elementary school, like in 4th grade. It's a really good set of books.
I have very fond memories of my mom reading that to me actually when I was really young.
Oh man, that brings back memories.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about good writing.
Essentially, that was the book series she was given to read as a kid when she went to England when they briefly immigrated there before coming to the States.
Oh man, classic literature, man. Like it needs some revival. It needs to be brought back into the forelight.
I have a list of books I will subject my kids to, so that'll be fun.
I have a list of books I will subject people to.
That's a good series. It suddenly came to me again. I was like, I need to reread that.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's keep going.
Taran, from the land of Prydain, a teenage boy and assistant pig keeper who dreams of becoming a famous warrior. Delbin the Enchanter, Taran's boss, learns that the evil Horned King is searching for a mystical relic known as the Black Cauldron to create an invincible army of undead warriors. Fearing he will kidnap and use his magical pig, Hen Wen, to locate the cauldron, Delbin directs Taran to take Hen Wen to safety. Unfortunately, Taran's foolish daydreaming causes Hen Wen to be captured by the Horned King's dragon-like creatures. Taran follows them to the Horned King's castle and sneaks in to rescue Hen Wen, but is captured and thrown into the dungeon. Another captive, named Princess Elanwai, frees him as she tries to escape. In the catacombs beneath the castle, Taran and Elanwai discover the ancient burial chamber of a king. Taran arms himself with the king's sword, which is imbued with magic that allows him to effectively fight the Horned King's minions, thus fulfilling his dream of being a warrior. From here, Taran and his friends must complete their quest to stop the Horned King at all costs. The film's plot is simply a mess, a convoluted labyrinth of undetailed, unexplained and underdeveloped ideas. It is easy to see why the film ended up this way, however. Through a prolonged decade of development hell, the Black Cauldron became an albatross around the neck of the animators at the House of Mouse. Through corporate politics and mismanagement, many people were assigned to the project before swiftly moving on elsewhere. During a test screening in 1984, the film was deemed to be traumatizing to the young audience, with children running out in terror. Newly appointed Disney studio chairman Jeffrey Katzenberg demanded over 10 minutes of cuts before its release in a battle with the new CEO Michael Eisner, further butchering the fractured film. Some of these cuts are even noticeable in the final movie, creating jumps in the film's soundtrack. The first cut of the film was incredibly dark and strayed far from the kind of movie Disney would put out.
The first culture clash happened on a much anticipated film that was years in the making and millions over budget, The Black Cauldron.
The first couple of weeks I was at the studio, I saw The Black Cauldron. It was a very dark movie and a very troubled movie. This is just way, way, way too violent and too scary. You have to edit some of these things out. And they said, well, you can't edit an animated movie. And I said, well, of course you can edit an animated movie. And they said, well, no, you can't.
Hey, no, you don't.
You honestly, you would think that I was causing World War III there at the studio, because I later said, well, you know what? You get the film and bring it to an edit bay, and I'm going to show you how you edit an animated movie.
I mean it.
From blood and violence, including decomposing bodies and sacrificial suicide, to kidnapping and overtly sexual imagery, the film was a far cry from Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty. The cutscenes contained even darker elements, including the melting faces of undead soldiers. There was a belief by some at Disney that the company wasn't cool, and that teenagers would never go to see a Disney cartoon. So they set out to entice them with this darker material. In the 80s, we had seen family films.
I think they needed the longevity, essentially.
Films like The Secret of Nim, The Dark Crystal, and even scenes of melting Nazis in Raiders of the Lost Ark. However, the filmmakers failed to understand that audiences really expected Disney's films to be completely family-friendly, suitable for the very youngest viewers. In the end, The Black Cauldron became a commercial and critical failure, the worst in the company's history, due to the massive...
I think part of this comes down to the fact that, in particular, Disney at this point in time, when they created The Black Cauldron, had not shed the imagery that they could also make teenage and adult movies.
Yeah, I wonder if releasing it under a different brand, like taking Disney's name off of it might have helped.
I
No, not
think
with that
so.
budget over. I don't think it would have helped so much to overcome that budget issue.
But yeah, no, I agree. I agree. it's just one of those things that like it's absolutely a fantastic film and it's definitely worth a watch, but it was not made for younger audiences very clearly.
Yeah.
Because the story is too dark. The imagery is too dark. But it's definitely one that teenagers could get around. It's definitely one that adults could get around. And I think it would be a very successful film overall if it was just held off.
I could see that.
If they had vaulted this instead of actually producing it and had just simply stopped and been like, all right, we're going to come back to this in 10 years. And we'll bring back the same people to be able to do it. That would have been perfect, because then you could have reassigned everybody in the correct way. But that comes down to the same thing that they talked before, which is the mismanagement of movies and film.
Yeah.
But
It's
in terms
amazing
of the
how much
writing, though. It's fantastic.
amazing how much influence office politics can have on that.
Yeah, and it's
But
one
yeah,
of
the writing is great.
The writing is absolutely fantastic, and it's one of the things that like even gems can get ruined by simply not thinking through what you're doing. And this is a PSA for anybody who's working on a writing development. If you feel that your product is not in alignment with the thing that you're trying to do, stop doing it. Make that decision immediately. You don't need to push through crap.
Yeah. And ultimately, sunk cost fallacy just gets worse and worse the more you look at it.
Yeah, and
But-
this is a great example of it. This is definitely a great example of it.
I will say this, though. Thinking back, I think I was 12 or 13 the first time I saw this, and that might be why I have such an affection for it.
I think I was around the same time as well. I think I watched it probably around 10 to 12, somewhere in that age. But I found it to be a fantastic movie. But at the same time, I was also a kid who grew up playing Dungeons and Dragons. I understood the imagery of demons and undead and the idea behind it. The imagery, the understanding that it's fictional. And these are fantastic worlds. And I think that's part of the thing is that like it's not a younger audience. It is a young audience, but not a younger audience. It's not the preteens and the below the age of 10 that would watch this. It's people who are above the age of 10. And I think this also lends itself to the idea that like having ratings on movies should be more important to the audience that you're trying to capture than it is to I need to make family friendly movies because that's what I make.
For lack of a better word, this is very much a movie for the babysitter rather than the kids they're babysitting.
I think that's a great point. Yeah. It's the movie for the babysitter and not for the kids. And there's plenty of babysitters.
Yeah.
But anyways.
Costs of the production. Its failure almost caused the heads at Disney to finally close the animation department after years of decline. It was only due to the fact that The Great Mouse Detective was already in production that this never happened. Luckily, The Great Mouse Detective was a hit, and Disney Animation Studios would go on to renewed success in the next decade, with a string of hits during the Disney Renaissance. Despite its many flaws, The Black Cauldron is quite an interesting film, and visually stunning for its time. It's the first Disney animated film to feature computer-generated imagery. It may have stumbled, but it served as some inspiration for darker tone material to come, such as The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and even some Pixar movies. It doesn't seem as dark compared to modern day efforts, and has since become a cult classic. But more than anything, the film is notable due to the changes it brought about. That's it for this review. What did you think of The Black Cauldron? Did you enjoy this film as a child? Let us know in the comments down below. Till next time, take care of yourself and keep watching more movies.
I like this series. I really do.
Really good. Definitely give it a shout out to More Movies. That was absolutely fantastic. I really like his opinion and review. We also covered the plot lines and the relative history to those movies. That's pretty good. I like that a lot. There is another person who does it. But this is like a 50-minute video that goes into the very, 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 very specific details, which is done by Breadsword. I highly recommend that one too.
What was the name? Sorry.
Breadsword.
Okay, I heard you right the first time. I was just like, what?
Yeah, Breadsword. He also has an amazing Jak and Daxter review. So I absolutely recommend that in terms of game reviews. Breadsword is great. Apparently, I sound like him quite a bit. You up for one more video? We could do this one.
Yeah, sure, I'm down.
All right, we'll make this the last one.
All right, sounds good.
And then we might go to some gaming.
Yeah, sure.
Alright, before we talk the Black Cauldron specifically and why it's deserving of a seat in the pantheon of crucial Halloween flicks, we first need to define what a Halloween movie is, which is sort of a problem because we don't really know what a Halloween movie is. There's no widely agreed upon criteria, at least not one I could find. So if I asked you to name me a Halloween movie off the top of your head, whether your response was Hocus Pocus, Her, or Happy Feet, nobody could really call any of them a wrong answer, at least not in a way that's quantifiable. And therein lies the pitfall of a question with no wrong answer. There can never be a right answer to it either. And when it comes to discerning what features do or don't belong to a grouping of films, this very quickly crosses the threshold from charmingly paradoxical into sincerely annoying. So with no prominent touchstone of tears to go by, in order...
Okay, so... Do you think I sound like him?
Kind of.
Kind of? Okay.
It's one of those things where, depending on the audio quality, that might change a bit.
He's got good audio quality.
Also, now I want to go watch The Iron Giant.
Oh man, that's a great movie. We'll do that next time. We'll do that next time.
Yeah. There was an IKEA that was always playing in, like the movie next to the ball pit was always The Iron Giant.
Oh, it's great. Such a great.
Oh, Coraline.
Coraline is also
God,
another good one.
Out.
It's a creepy movie, but like it's such a good one. Like
it's beautifully done.
Yeah. God, Tim Burton. What a classic.
Tim Burton, why do you do this to me?
Why do you make me enjoy stop motion animation so much? It's because of that uncanny valley effect, but it's done in a very like enjoyable way.
Yes, but then also the details and how detailed the models get and how that gets played off for later story reward, essentially.
Yeah.
Coraline or Casper as an official Halloween hit, the only path forward is to start at the beginning and create a movie. The very beginning.
Oh god, that movie.
Halloween's history.
There's this really big island that kind of looks like a dog standing in the wind, and around 10,500 BC, people started popping up on it. From then until the early 17th century, when it fell under the complete control of King Henry VIII because he was a dick, it oscillated between the total and partial rule of its native people, the Gaelic. If you haven't guessed yet, by the way, the dog is Ireland. Anyways, the Gaelic were a fascinating culture with an incredibly long and rich history, stretching across most of northwestern Europe. But perhaps their most well-known contribution to the modern world is a pagan festival by the name of Samhain, which took place between October 31st and November 1st, marking the beginning of winter and the dark half of the Gaels' calendar year. One of 4 seasonal festivals and existing as a polar opposite to the festival of Bealtaine, which denoted the beginning of summer, Samhain was a festival of death. It was thought to be a time when the boundary between this world and the other world thinned, allowing the Ishi, spirit-like fairies within Gaelic mythology, to more easily enter and interact with the world of humans. And along with them would travel the spirits of the dead, seeking their old homes and desiring hospitality. Yeah. Places would often be set at tables or by fires to welcome the dead home, and tributes of food would be left outside, along with portions of crops being left unharvested in hopes of pacifying the Ishi in exchange for their blessings. And all of this was done to ensure that the Gaelic people could survive the harshness of the coming winter. Most of the still-known myths of Samhain describe werewolves, demons, ghosts, and the sacrifice of other humans and the characterization of the forces of nature during that time of year. Personifications of coldness, chaos, darkness, death, blight, and drought occupy the overwhelming majority of these stories. People gradually began to adorn costumes and masks representing these spirits, and along with bonfires lit as protective barriers against these forces of winter, they had also begun hollowing out turnips to hold candles in, both as a means to ward off the unkind spirits and as lanterns for the young to light their paths as they gathered food for the feasts and carried out mischievous acts and pranks across their villages. Soon, these traditions spread to Britain and Wales, from Britain and Wales to Germany, and from northwestern Europe to the Roman Catholic Church itself.
Okay, you get props for Crash Bandicoot.
In 885 AD to switch the holy day
I love
of
his
All Hallows
videos.
Eve
They're
from
fantastic.
May 12th to October 31st as well. A little under 1,200 years later, and with a gentle push from marketing, more than 175 million Americans plan to celebrate Halloween this year, spending an estimated $9 billion
That was
between
cool.
costumes, decorations, treats, greeting cards, and, you guessed
Fair
it,
enough.
movies. Thanks almost entirely to the oral traditions passed down by the ancient Gaels of Ireland. So, now that we've done a bit of brushing up on our history, we're able to separate
Mel
the
Brooks.
holiday of Halloween into two hemispheres of representation, the seasonal and the spiritual. And from these two hemispheres, we can distill 5 basic criteria for what makes a Halloween movie a Halloween movie. 1. Is it made clear that the film takes place in the season of autumn through either setting or dialogue? 2. Does it reference the existence of or belief in spirits or the living dead? 3. Do the color palettes predominantly contain the colors of autumn and or the onset of winter? 4. Does it feature monsters or otherworldly beings such as werewolves, demons, and vampires? 5. Does it feature an unsettling or otherwise macabre selection of music in its soundtrack? And voila! If any feature can check at least 3 of these boxes, it's earned itself a room in the halls of Hallows Eve. And now that we're crystal clear on why nobody can say Mean Girls is their favorite Halloween movie just because there's a costume party in it, we can finally talk the big BC and why it gets an A+ from me, starting with the decade and a half that it spent in production hell, or as I've taken to calling it, Disney's Inferno.
Alright, props for the reference.
Yeah.
A lot of big things happened in 1966. David Bowie released his first single,
I was
Wilt
born.
Chamberlain broke the NBA career scoring record, and India elected a woman, Indira Gandhi, as their 4th prime minister. It was a time of great excitement and great turmoil in a rapidly developing post-World War II humanity. And it was during this time that one of the brightest lights to have ever graced the world of animation quietly flickered out. Before he could see his dream, the city of Epcot, come to fruition, the animation titan Walt Disney passed away from lung cancer at the age of 65. And with the release of Wolfgang Reitherman's The Jungle Book in the October of the following year, Disney Animation's already decade-long doldrum soon slowed to a crawl. The company had become a shadow of its former self, known internationally almost exclusively for its theme parks and live-action films. And the frequency by which they released animated features dropped from once every 1.5 years to once every 3.5. 1971
That's a
brought the
big
passing
drop.
of Roy Disney, Walt's brother and CEO of Disney Productions. And over the following decade, its animation department saw a majority of the 9 old men, Walt's senior counsel and most experienced artists retire, a mass exodus of their brightest animators led by Don Bluth, an industry-wide strike, and a corporate power struggle that ended with the replacement of Disney insider Ron Miller with animation outsider Michael Eisner as their new CEO. An event that would come to be the single greatest impetus for the Black Cauldron's now notorious murder and burial. The Black Cauldron's journey starts around the same time Roy's had ended, in 1971, after Disney decided to option a wildly popular 5-volume children's fantasy series based on Welsh mythology. The Cauldron was handed off to artist and writer Mel Shaw to begin rendering pastels of the upcoming feature for use as recruitment tools for soon-to-be.
Those are gorgeous pieces of art.
They are gorgeous.
Like, my God.
Disney would make a tidy sum if they just were putting concept art as like prints.
Yeah, selling prints. Like, I
Although that might be complicated with who holds the rights. I think Disney holds all of them. I'm not sure, especially with their older stuff.
well, it's the fact that Disney is such a bloated corporation that it would be near impossible for them to do that. Like, 'cause so many hands touch that. So many royalties would have to be passed out for that to work.
You ever think about just like how many levels of middle manager hell there has to be in Disney?
Well, Disney Inferno. It's an
Yeah, fair enough.
accurate sum.
CalArts graduates, eager to participate in what they thought at the time would be their generation's Snow White, and the long-awaited reawakening of the once beloved sleeping giant of animation. Pre-production didn't officially begin until 1973, when Disney finally obtained the rights from its author. But with corporate mismanagement and Don Bluth's departure in 1979 as a protest to it, there hadn't been anyone to stand at the project's helm until 1980, when veteran layout artist Joe Hale assumed command as the film's producer. With nearly a decade of fragmentary progress behind the film already, Hale's first Herculean task in what would later become a famously grueling struggle to craft the film was taking the living and breathing world that an author had built over the course of 5 books and condensing them into a single, coherent film. To accomplish this daunting feat, Hale combined the major plot points of the first 2 books, along with some minor details from the latter 3, and picked a minor villain from the first, the Horned King, to crown as the old but new to him film's sole antagonist. It was...
That's one of the things that book adaptations are very difficult to do.
Yeah.
In this case, The Black Cauldron really should have been outlined in its entirety as a multi-film project. But at the time, Disney had not done multi-film projects. That's another key point that I think us looking back in reference to this is Disney by this point had not done multi-films.
Yeah, that's a definite negative for them. I will
At least
say,
not in
I will-
animation. I'll say
Yeah.
that specifically. At least not in animation.
I will say at least I will prefer a good story that can stand on its own that leads into more stories than a part of a larger story that can't stand on its own. But
yeah. So it's almost a crying shame in that sense that this is what became of The Black Cauldron, because outlining the story in its entirety is definitely a bigger subset to it. Because there, again, yeah, the Horned King is a minor villain. He's not actually the main antagonist of the entirety of Black Cauldron. Which is something that I don't think most people know, and part of what we discussed in the previous review is that it doesn't give context for the things that are going on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of its biggest downsets in that. It's a very entertaining movie. It is very entertaining, but it's very unexplained.
Yeah, but I don't know. It's one of those where, because that sort of sword and sorcery archetype, for lack of a better word, you can kind of follow along.
Yeah.
This is going to be a terrible example, but I had the same feeling with the Aragorn movie.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on, but I'm just going to follow the tropes until someone gets stabbed.
Pretty much. I mean, one of the things is, like, Aragon itself is a fantastic book series. Condensing the movie the way they did really sucked because it skipped between 2 books.
Mm.
And there is a major subset of information that goes into those books that was altered to make it fit for a movie. And it was a 1-movie project. They should have just made each book, because each book is just that entertaining.
It's definitely one of those things where, as we talked about earlier in the episode, each medium has its own limitations and its own advantages.
Yeah, but it's about overcoming those limitations. And as a movie producer and somebody who's writing for screenplays and things like that, one of the biggest hurdles you should understand is conceptualization. And that if you're going to adapt a book story of something like that, you need to be able to outline whether or not you need to do this in more than 1 movie. Yeah. And I think one of the constraints that's always the toughest is saying to yourself, I've only got 1 movie to do this with. but I've got a book series that's massive that people are really entertained by. I think the bigger risk in that case is the fact that you have to push back and say, no, we need to just do the first book. And if people want the second movie, we can give them the second movie later. Because that's a much more fulfilling thing. And here's the thing. Multi-movie series are successful. Franchise series are successful. They do exist. And it's not just one-offs necessarily. I mean, I hate to say it, but like Fast and Furious.
Oh, that movie refuses to die.
It does refuse to die, but it's a good movie series for that reason. They're entertaining. They continue on with each set.
They are fantastic to watch hammered. It's great.
They're good movies. They're not the greatest in the world. Sorry, Vin Diesel. I hate to say it, but you're not the greatest actor in the world. Just how Henry Cavill, but he's getting paid for it, and from a corporate perspective, it should be more value to you to create a multi-movie series, even if it stops early, even if you don't get the next movie. It's the same thing with anime. Anime, in a ton of instances, the mangakas have created manga that goes out much further, but the anime series ends up maybe stopping short and they don't get to animate the next set of the series.
It's
Berserk. We'll never get to
really
actually get the ending of Berserk for that reason.
Yeah. Well, didn't he essentially, part of the reason it slowed down was because he was essentially teaching the people who would write it after he was gone and was essentially writing the outline for how it would end?
Pretty much. And
or is
he
that
didn't
a
get
different anime?
I think that was a different anime, but like the mangaka for Berserk had been doing it all by himself, and he pretty much worked himself to death.
Yeah.
And he wanted to pass it on, but nobody can do what he did. And everybody is agreed that they don't want to do it.
That's fair. It's also one of those things where just circling back to, man, that White House press secretary added that to my vernacular. Anyways, there was a meme where it's like, here's a picture of Vin Diesel in a tank top looking fat on a yacht in Venice, and someone underneath it written, he's on a yacht in Venice, he can do what he wants.
Yeah, I mean, like, who fucking cares, man? Let him enjoy his life. I'm more jealous that I can't be on the yacht with him having mojitos. Like, he made his money, he's doing well. Who cares?
Oh, yeah.
He still looks better than half of the United States. But anyways, moving on.
During this early period of shaping what the film would truly become, that Disney veteran and art director Don Griffith, along with a young talent by the name of Mike Hodgson, were quickly pulled onto the project, contributing a great deal to the world and character designs of the finished film, using Mel Shaw's prejudiced pastels as a visual guide. In an effort to pool ideas and invigorate the film with a more diverse range of artistic influence, Hale also invited some of the new kids on the block, ones with names like Michael Peraza and Tim Burton, as well as accomplished artists outside of the Magical Kingdom's domain, such as Mike Ploog, the original artist for Marvel's Ghost Rider, to contribute concept art for the film's characters and environments. Despite Hale's best efforts though, the book still proved to be an incredibly difficult body of work to condense and adapt. The film's trio of directors at the time, Art Stevens, Ted Berman, and Rick Rich, began to feel that their sequences had become almost stagnant after months of reworks and seemingly directionless toil. Their lack of inspiration eventually became so perceptible to one another that they even traded each other their sequences, citing no other reason than to have a fresh pair of eyes. And it's hard to blame them for having their inspiration, albeit temporarily sapped from them, when you consider the circumstances of their reworks. See, The Black Cauldron was set to be Disney's second film ever to be formatted for and shot in 70mm, and a few weeks after the layout department had been given new charts to plan and compose the film's scenes on, it was discovered by one of the new kids I mentioned earlier, Michael Peraza, that the charts didn't actually line up with the charts from Disney's first 70mm feature, Sleeping Beauty. as they would soon come to find out the charts that the layout artists had been given weren't actually the right dimensions, and all of the work that had already been done so far on the film would have to be scrapped and redrawn.
Oh, jeez.
By this point,
that's
fairly
rough.
understandably, everyone involved in the feature had started to feel that maybe the production was simply cursed, later being cited by Tim Burton as the reason he quit animation. But unbeknownst to any of them, their troubles had unfortunately only just begun. As the waves of this first catastrophe began to subside, the animation industry went on strike, pushing back the film's eventual release date even further. And in an almost cosmically cruel twist of irony, nearly as soon as the animators had returned to their posts and resumed their work on The Black Cauldron, the production team would be told that Ron Miller, Walt Disney's son-in-law and chosen successor, had been ousted by non-Disney affiliated suits from Paramount, ones that most people in the department had never even heard of before. And better still, they would soon come to learn that their new leaders had never touched an animation before either. Enter Michael Eisner, Frank Wells, and Jeffrey Katzenberg. Not only had these guys not worked on an animation before, but their introduction to the animation studio was a historically bad foot to get off on, demonstrating a shocking lack of even a primitive understanding of the company's work. Eisner famously announcing during his introductory speech how happy he was to be at Disney, followed by, after all, who could ever forget Heckle and Jekyll and Mighty Mouse, a CBS cartoon. As the suits began to settle in, and as the work that had been completed so far for The Black Cauldron was screened for Katzenberg, he requested to be shown cover shots, and was puzzled to find that having a surplus of material, such as a multitude of shots, only existed in live-action productions. And it was after this, when Katzenberg was eventually screened the completed film, that The Black Cauldron was issued its death sentence. As the film came to an end and the closing credits began to roll, Katzenberg expressed his deep displeasure for it and commanded Joe Hale and Roy E. Disney, Walt's nephew, to have the film cut by 10 minutes, despite it already being in full color. A ludicrously costly and insulting demand, and one that was not only virtually unheard of in the world of animation, but one that was completely impractical for the film being so close to its release. After cutting as much as they could from the film without causing what they felt would be irreparable harm to its narrative, Hale and Disney showed Katzenberg The Cauldron again, to which Katzenberg's only response was, "Is that 10 minutes?" When Roy and Hale replied with no in a desperate explanation as to why, Katzenberg simply repeated his previous demand, and in a fit of frustration with the feature, rushed into the editing bay himself and cut nearly 3 minutes from the picture, having no experience with either animation or the editing of films, prompting the terrified animators to drag Eisner himself down and order Katzenberg to stop. Eventually, he emerged from the room, but under the knavish condition that Hale and Disney cut 12 minutes from the picture. An unthinkable and ruinous act to any animated feature. His obsession with the film's marketability to children, despite its intent for a teenage audience, as well as his contempt for a department that he hadn't yet earned the respect of, causing a figurative cataclysm of The Black Cauldron, leaving its pacing, its structure, its animation, its score, and its voiceover work a diminished reflection of what it originally was. One of the most ambitious and grand in scope projects to ever depart from the Magic Kingdom, what was expected to be the next generation's Snow White and the strike of lightning that would finally rouse the tired company from its slumber, forever condemned to failure and obscurity. A victim to its own ambition and the subversive forces of corporate interest that wished to repress it. Anyways, with its production woes now laid before us, it's finally time to dive into the Cauldron itself. This part of the video is called Story, and why I don't care what the book says.
Alright, fair enough.
This will be an interesting
is
take.
nothing like the story or series of stories that it bears its name to, and I love it. Every beat in the film, from its exposition to its denouement, are completely separate from any one entry in the fantasy pentalogy that it serves as a very loose adaptation.
I think the original cuts
the Chronicles
are,
of Prydain, and
I think
the film
full
instead
film is
represents a
available.
sort of dark fantasy jambalaya, consisting of a myriad of landmarks, plot beats, and themes found throughout the collection of books. And it is a fantastically unconventional and surprisingly harrowing film for doing so. This tremendous deviation from its source material, however, put its already broken form at an overwhelmingly more arduous disadvantage in winning over some of its target audience and critics, because The Chronicles of Bradane was still a very popular series of books at the time of The Black Cauldron's release. See, making the decision to adapt a written work to the screen
answer is
in
no.
any
There is not.
capacity is historically one of the most daunting and rewarding tasks that you can undertake.
There's allegedly
as
a
an
black and
artist,
white
and
full
it is one
version,
that demands
but it's never been released.
So, Disney people out there, old Disney people out there, if you have the original uncut Black Cauldron, I would love to see it.
You make it sound like we're asking for cocaine.
Yeah,
But
I
yes.
know, but it kind of is. It's asking for Aztec gold at this point.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Because it's such a cursed film in that sense, but it's such a good film for what it's worth.
Also, unfortunately, 40 years is a lot of time to lose something.
It is, especially for something that is a video cassette film. Something that was
Oh,
done
God,
on
yeah.
actual
The power of VCR.
on actual scope.
Yeah.
a tremendous amount of talent and prose to do so with any kind of success. Many of the greatest films from many of the greatest filmmakers of all time have been adaptations, and notoriously difficult films to complete. The Shining, Seven Samurai, Orson Welles' Othello, and Apocalypse Now being some of the first examples that come to
Apocalypse
mind.
Now is
And
great.
among the other countless adversities of creating any film of any scope
It's honestly
in any
impressive how
setting,
well it
it is
turned
with
out with how
adaptation
horrible it was
specifically
made.
that you must present your works to the unrelenting and unforgiving gaze of the readers, the most critical and least appreciative moviegoing demographic on Earth. Hundreds of tweets, thousands of reblogs, and at least one Facebook group later, Michael Gambon had better hope he never ends up stuck in an elevator with one of the millions of fans
God,
in the world
Tumblr.
who grudge him Bethesda for the rest of their lives.
Because he did it calmly in the books.
Ugh. Saying the book was better about a film is the cinematic equivalent to saying you prefer your mom's cooking when you're eating at a restaurant. Nobody told you it was bad in the first place, but everybody wishes you had stayed home. It's the same ingredients, it's just the chef's own recipe, and that's what an adaptation is supposed to be, whatever the filmmaker wants. Anyways, point is, every change a producer, director, writer, set designer, editor, actor, or anyone else makes when they're adapting a literary work lowers a figurative sword of Damocles 1 foot closer to their shoulder. And most of the time, the best route to making a compelling and unique cinematic experience is just letting it stab you right out of the gate. And that's exactly what The Black Cauldron does. The film opens with a fade from black into a dark chamber, a current of ghastly green mist slowly sweeping towards the left of frame to reveal a great black cauldron.
It's 'cause it's
the
Disney.
unnerving strings of composer Elman Bernstein and the foreboding, reverberated narration by the legendary John
I mean, I'm
Huston
not
work in
complaining.
unison with a low-angle shot to establish with a great deal of immediacy that this is going to be the true master of our fear throughout the rest of the film, as the prologue explains precisely what terrors could be wrought from its use. Chekhov's cauldron, if you will. After a thunderclap of cymbals and the soaring of various horns and strings to underscore the film's title card, we then cut to the signature multiplane camera dollying shot that usually acts as the introduction to Disney's films. And it is with this shot, the roaring orchestra from the title card now replaced with a solitary, gently humming flute accompanied by the bright chirping of birds, that nearly all semblance to Disney's well-established aesthetic and oral trademarks ends. The apprehensive strings are reintroduced with the cut away from our establishing shots, and as we're taken into this quaint cottage, we're introduced to our protagonist, but not before we're introduced to his caretaker. The first line of dialogue in the film, "Something's wrong," delivered in his brooding, elderly voice. Something wrong. Awakens a cat, and following its lead, the camera departs from the darkened corner we've taken up residence in, panning over to the sun-drenched center of the room, and more importantly, over to Dalbin, just as he says the name of the film's antagonist.
The Horned King, that black-hearted devil.
After a little more brooding and another slow pan, this time following the cat and Dalbin both, we cut to our first shot of Taran, our boy hero protagonist, staring longingly into the sunlight, paying no heed to his darkened surroundings or the cauldron, presumably one that he was left in charge of, that has begun to boil over just a few feet away from him. A candid portrait of youth. Once Dalbin has managed to seize him away from his daydreaming, Taran not only immediately forgets to do what he was asked, instead proposing wordly that he might not get a chance to fight against the Horned King who Dalbin just ended a very anxious monologue about, but he then burns his hand on the already forgotten cauldron, and is reminded once then and again with Dalbin's particularly foreshadowing response to it of the folly of untried bravery, before being assigned his chores for the day, cueing us into the next scene. One that both introduces us to the prophetic plot device pig Henwen and reiterates Taran's youthful naivety. Discontent with his humdrum life as an assistant pig keeper, Taran quickly submerges himself in another daydream, acting out a courageous stick sword fight, until he's knocked to the ground and quickly found by Dalbin, who, laughing away Taran's hastily pieced together excuse, tells him to give Henwen a bath. And herein lies the Black Cauldron's next significant step away from the classic Disney formula. Our dream-obsessed boytagonist puts his adorable forest friend in a bath as his affable caretaker exits stage left, and if Disney has taught us anything about cinema, it's that this is primetime musical number real estate. But as we boil over in anticipation to hear our young lead bare his soul to the high heavens, he just talks, and nothing else happens. Not only is there no musical number, there's no music during this moment at all, where the John Hudson Elder Scrolls intro monologue and the antagonist's name being the Horned King were just signs. This quiet moment, denying even our basest of instincts that have been developed and nurtured over Disney's past 24 feature releases and 50 years leading up to it, is a giant flashing billboard with pyrotechnics above it periodically spelling out "not that kind of movie" in Morse code.
They put
and
Braille
before we're
on
able
a
to even
billboard.
process our circumvented
That's Morse code.
expectations, this happens.
Oh, okay.
Hey, come on, Hen.
This makes more
I've been
sense.
scrubbing your back. Hen, what's the matter? Calm down, Hen. Stop it, please. What's the matter? Henry.
Helen, what's going on?
I don't know. There's something wrong with Henry.
What? Oh, quickly, lad. Bring her inside.
The uneasy strings return a third time, and accompanying them is a chorus of terrified squeals. As Dalbin rushes out and beckons Taran back to the cottage, we return to a now blackened interior, and are given the big reveal of Henwen's powers. Taran and Henwen's following hastened departure, bookending the front-loaded exposition sequence for our coming adventure. The only thing we truly know by this point being what to fear, and this is communicated to us through our King's Quest stand-in by Dalbin's reminder that being a courageous protagonist doesn't guarantee you clemency from death, much less a king that commands it. So, the star players so far are Taran and the Horned King, and if we've learned anything about T. Grizzly from our first 8 minutes with him, it's that he's almost 100% going to lose Henwen within the next 2 scenes. Before we're able to find out, though, the film cuts to another darkly lit, low-angle shot, this time of a terribly grim and commanding keep, bearing resemblance to the castles of Disney's past, only in its extreme sheerness, existing otherwise as a singularly foreboding structure within his lineage, accentuated perfectly by the spine-chilling strings and musical saw of Bernstein's composition, suddenly erupting in an uproarious clash of cymbals and horns as we're taken into the Horned King's keep. The thunderous orchestral piece that had been gaining momentum as we faded into the keep's interior suddenly comes to a screeching halt with the film's next transition, a static shot of lustrous blood red assailed on all sides by shadows. Rather than entering from left or right of frame, the Horned King's blackened silhouette penetrates from below, and the intimacy of this debut relative to the comfortable distance kept by the other character introductions throughout the film instills a tremendous amount of discomfort and fear with considerable haste. In this following shot, we are introduced to his achingly cold, almost frostbitten voice as it reverberates through the open hall of corpses that he stands amidst. And
also, some of the best voice acting I've ever heard.
It is really good. Also, a minor thing that's been annoying me. When I was a kid and I'd never seen pigs, I was convinced they didn't have hair. And then I actually went and lived on a farm for a little bit, and then I realized, no, pigs have hair. And ever since then, every time I see pigs animated, it weirds me out.
Yeah, pigs have hair.
It is with this menacing monologue that we're given our last drops of exposition for the film.
Its evil power will course through my veins, and I shall make you Cauldron-born.
Precisely as John Huston told us earlier, and as an answer to Dalbin's question from his introduction, the Horned King means to capture the Black Cauldron, and harnessing its awesome power, raise an army of undead warriors to wreak havoc among the living. So, within the first 10 minutes of its runtime, the Black Cauldron has already exhibited a beautiful diversity and artistic influence, and
look how beautiful those shots are.
Oh yeah.
Those are beautiful pieces of art.
an assuredly refreshing attention to detail, both in its visuals and its soundscapes, between the comforting and pleasant lines, colors, and sounds of Keir Dalbin, and the incredibly rigid, dramatic, and sharp line work accompanied by the especially dramatic lighting and disquieting music of the Horned King's Keep. And it's within this introductory sequence that one detail in particular makes the world of Prydain and the lives that our characters have lived within it feel a great deal more believable. There's barely any food. I mean, there is some food. It's acknowledged as a necessity a number of times throughout the first few minutes of the film, but between Dalbin's reluctance to eat, the food they do have being an unappetizing slop even to the animals, and Taran only being given a very small slice of bread and an apple as he departs for a perilous, multiple-day minimum, might-never-return journey, as well as the severity of his reaction when the apple is taken from him soon after this, all point to this world being one that is sincerely perilous. The sole instance of food being enjoyed in abundance throughout the entire film, in fact, taking place within the Horned King's own banquet hall. Sure, there's a bushel of apples sat outside of Dalbin and Taran's cottage for a grand total of one shot, but they're being laid outside away from the food the characters are interacting with is an important distinction as well. They aren't indulging in their excess because the food, more than likely, is not for them. Rations and crop taxes, especially in times of great war like the one taking place off-screen, exist to these characters. Though the good and their lack of indulgence juxtaposed against the evil in their gluttony may be a relatively minute detail, paling in comparison to the many wondrous set pieces and action sequences throughout most of the film, it is this eccentricity that I would argue aids the Black Cauldron in separating itself from its familial bonds and presenting a living, breathing world the most. Speaking of detailed environments and the Horned King's Keep, I think now would be a good time to talk animation, special effects, and editing. Alright, so remember earlier when we talked about the whole 12 minutes of completed footage being cut from the film thing? Right, so it turns out doing something like that leaves some pretty gaping holes in your film's story. Not just narratively, but visually as well. Many of the shots cut from the originally completed Black Cauldron were transition shots, or shots which contained too much violence to stay at the PG rating that Katz and the gang were gunning for. The problem with this, or at least the greatest of many problems with it, is that without some of these sequences being reanimated, the Black Cauldron would have released as a mostly incoherent sequence of disconnected moments. So the last year of the film's production saw the reanimation of some of these shots, but with brevity being vastly favored over quality. And the result was a film that was mostly coherent, at least from a narrative perspective, but one that featured a myriad of visual inconsistencies. Here, actually, this is one of my favorite examples. This is the introduction of Gurgi, when Taran in his search for Henwen is assailed from above and then robbed of his apple by the Forbidden Forest's favorite dogchild. Keep an eye on Gurgi's color and his line art.
Look what I've got. Come on out. Here's a lovely
Oh man, yeah, you can see the stark difference.
Ooh, great prince. Give poor starving Gurgi munchings and crunchings. Nice apple.
Got it? Alright, we'll pin that up right here. Now let's watch Gurgi's second appearance, only 3 minutes later.
Not going there. Forget the piggy.
What are you doing here?
Gurgi come back to be your friend.
Friend? You're no friend. Why, you ran away when I...
Notice anything? Gurgi's fur from this point until the end of the film is noticeably desaturated in comparison to his introduction, regardless of lighting. And with this reemergence to warn Taran of the dangers awaiting him in the Horned King's Keep, his outline changes as well. From this olive blue we originally saw to a solid black, like the rest of the cast for the rest of the film. Oh, here's another example. One of the most eviscerated sequences in the entire film is the Cauldronborn sequence near its conclusion, which in its original state had infamously caused Disney's test screening to be stormed out of by almost every child and parent in the audience. Watch this.
Yeah.
Half eyes, no eyes, then full eyes. An ocean lies between the first two shots and the latter third shot in terms of quality. But what makes this inconsistency so compelling is how and why this was changed to begin with. So first of all, these two shots are not a character appearance and then a following cut on action of that same character. The first skeleton is wearing an iron helmet and has faintly glowing pupils that a few of the Cauldronborn are pictured with. After the cut, a second skeleton emerges with a cracked skull wearing leather armor with no helmet. This is because this sequence where the Cauldronborn emerge and quickly kill and then resurrect the Horned King's living soldiers as more Cauldronborn is supposed to have lasted way longer. The first two are cut together to give the impression this is one skeleton, lunging forward and allowing the skeletons in the third shot to follow through on this movement. The scene is pieced together this way and its third shot was hurriedly redrawn because every sequence that takes place within the Horned King's Keep throughout the film featured remarkably violent moments. During Taran's original escape from the castle, he actually kills a number of soldiers with his magic sword, and in the original version of this Cauldronborn awakening sequence, a skeleton slices a soldier's throat open, and this trio of Cauldronborn are not only pictured leaping onto the terrified men, but the film cuts to a shot of the two men's skin boiling, melting, and decomposing as they scream, leaving only their bones to bolster the forces of the Cauldronborn. The film was actually so graphic and so consistently committed to its macabre aesthetic in its original form that if it had remained untouched and had Joe Hale been able to release the film his team had struggled so much to create, The Black Cauldron would have made history as the first Disney animated feature to receive an R rating. More than cutting violence, though, Katzenberg forced Hale and Disney to cut out entire interactions.
By the way,
when
today
Taran
would
is
only
first
earn it
imprisoned
like a
within the keep,
PG-13.
lines that he had
I was
said
about to say.
an echo in his mind before he picks up a conspicuously light rock and clacks it against a stone wall behind him.
Must make sure he never uses Henwen to find the Black Cauldron.
I won't fail you, Dorban. Look at me, Hen. I can do it.
It's definitely a remark on the conservatism that happened during that time and period, and how restrictive we were on our films that we are not today.
Oh. To an extent, but it also kind of comes into the whole, essentially the pendulum sway of politics, especially in the States.
Yeah, but I think one of the remarkable things about this is that had this aired as an R-rated film, I think it would have been resoundingly more successful.
Maybe. I don't know enough about the market at the time.
Because the people who would be watching this more than likely would be the young adults and the kids who wanted to watch it, who were between the ages of probably 13 to 18.
Yeah.
And during that time, and I do remember this, is that you could watch an R-rated movie if you had a parent or somebody of the age of 18 with you.
Yeah, you could do that. Part of the problem would come in the marketing.
And that's the thing. This movie, they were trying to push to be a PG movie, and it's just not that right kind of movie.
No. Unfortunately, that's also something Disney has a really bad habit with some of their more outlandish products, is essentially really bad marketing efforts. That's essentially what I'm going to blame for killing John Carter of Mars.
Yeah. It's also what I
Which
blame
I really enjoyed.
Star Wars for. Bad marketing.
Yeah.
but that's on a different spectrum of bad marketing. But it's in the same idea that bad marketing can kill movies.
Oh, we could spend 2 hours going over each of the individual Star Wars movies' marketing.
Yeah, but we won't get into that. We'll continue to finish this, and then we'll pick up next week with more interesting stuff.
Sounds good.
Do it.
Or some other
Do
time.
it.
We never know when we're going to do this. We're just going to do it.
The only problem is, Taron never said some of those lines in the final cut we were given. Another example is here, when Fluter and Eilonwy meet Gurgi for the first time.
Too big anyway.
Oh. You're charming.
And pungent, too.
Notice how he completely changes the direction he was facing, and how Eilonwy lets out two differently pitched sighs, one right after another?
Oh.
There's an entire sentence that was cut out of this interaction, leaving only a disjointed series of sighs and Gurgi snapping over 100 degrees. In fact, this sequence, in which the trio, following their escape, fall into an argument and temporarily split from one another, was originally much longer as well. That's why the scene begins as Fluter is reaching the end of a song he's written, and why Eilonwy seems to giggle in bizarrely quick succession throughout this conversation. Perhaps the most grievous of these cuts, though, is the removal of the Fellowship's reaction when the cauldron erupts from the ground in Morva, before the trio of witches mock them for their inability to destroy it.
Black Cauldron. It's ours.
The companions battered the cauldron with all their might. Taran struck it with a huge stick.
Quick! We must destroy it!
The witches peered down from among the clouds.
This is exactly the kind of scene that Hale and Disney tried in vain to save in their first cut. It perfectly captures the unshackled, youthful vigor that our unlikely fellowship is bound together with, and is a reaction that is both gratifying and expected given the immeasurable terrors we know the Black Cauldron can unleash. Denying its viewers another glimpse of unrestrained and foolhardy and desperate action saps the sequence of its tension and momentum, leaving a hole more noticeable to its audience than any minute jump in the score or short desync with the ADR ever could, even though this exclusion left neither in its wake. And that's the true pity about the Black Cauldron. Even with so much of it cut and re-sewn together, pieces of its second act being ripped from its foundations and placed in the first act to be used as a character introduction, awkwardly floaty movements feeling as if they were slowed down to fill the length of a shot, and unnecessarily rigid ones feeling like they were sped up to shave runtime, the film still manages to retain nearly all of its spirit, and is, to me, a wonderful and enchanting watch. But the few instances where it truly suffers from these cuts are instances that didn't actually need to be taken out, and are ones that we know wouldn't have been had Katzenberg just left Disney and Hale to finish their film, or at least relented after they cut their first 6 minutes. There is no issue of pacing or strong display of violence that could bump up its rating to PG-13 and make it harder to market to kids by including this, and it's at most an additional 20 seconds of runtime. But what is lost is one of the most candid expressions of who our characters are and who they are written for in the film. But despite its inconsistencies, the Black Cauldron truly was the Snow White of its time. The animation on display throughout a majority of its runtime is some of the most fluid and convincing movement I've ever seen copied to a cell, and the intensity of its special effects, as well as its use of early CG, amplify an already electrifying and at times nightmarish film to create one of the most visually arresting experiences that Disney has ever given us. The fervency of Hen Wen's desperate sprint that we're given a bird's eye view of, and the ferocity and strength captured in the dragon's impact with both the ground and her, are even more agonizing and imposing than the screams she lets out in response to it. The decrepitness and the terrible strength still lying beneath the Horned King's hands as he effortlessly shatters a chalice or crushes Creeper's windpipe, as well as his slow but deliberate footsteps instill a greater, much deeper fear in the hearts of the Black Cauldron's audience than any other Disney villain from any Disney era. It is a film
Yeah.
so
The
convincing
Horned
in
King
its
is probably one
depiction
of
of
the
the slow
scariest
decay
Disney
and
villains.
terrible strength of
It
death
works
and
really
of life's
well.
thunderous
Mhm.
and unrelenting charge against it, that even in its eviscerated form, it remains Disney's scariest animated feature, as well as one of its most technologically progressive. Having realized a potential for computer imagery fairly soon after its introduction to film, Don Griffith and Joe Hale pulled a CG team from The Great Mouse Detective, and with their help, brought to life the whimsical, iridescent bauble of Elanwys, as well as the Black Cauldron itself and the terrible flames that it belches forth during the climactic conclusion of the film. The Black Cauldron's special effects team brought such blinding and intense and chilling images to the screen that its visuals were without equal in animated features until long after the film was released. Every glowing strike
fair,
of
I don't
lightning
think
from
they're
Terran's
matched even
sword, every
today.
dancing cauldron in the witch's hovel, every fair folk's delicate flight, and every sibylline sequence of Henwin's watery visions sets an incredibly high benchmark that even contemporary animated films feel like they either struggle to reach or don't try to reach at all. It feels as excited and eager to lean into the future as it does boldly defiant of the arbitrary standards and expectations projected upon it by the family it belongs to. It is, to me, 45 years after its production began and 33 years after its release, still Disney's most sincerely and singularly youthful film. Which brings me to characterization. The Black Cauldron came out during a time when the theatrical and retail markets for adolescents was at an all-time high thanks to a little-known remake of The Hidden Fortress. And needless to say, a lot of board members at the House of Mouse wanted in. We may have been given a cottage window instead of a binary sunset, but no matter how you cut it, Terran is the closest Disney ever came to owning their own Luke Skywalker until they owned Luke Skywalker. And this is
And
where
then proceeded to
narratively,
ruin
the
him.
Black Cauldron doesn't just shine, but is paradoxically helped by its relationships and personalities being underdeveloped as a result of Katzenberg's forced cuts. Hear me out. In the original Black Cauldron, there's a moment when Terran and Elanwy nearly kiss on accident, before their almost kiss near the end. And it is just after a longer version of their argument following their escape from the Horned King's keep. In the original cut of the film, obviously, there is a clearer and more reasonable catalyst for their disagreement to build into an argument, and the discourse itself lasts slightly longer before provoking Elanwy and Terran's very strong emotional reactions. However, in the Black Cauldron we were given, this entire argument from beginning to escalation to eruption to end takes something like 50 seconds. Elanwy questions if Terran really wasn't scared of the thing he was obviously scared of, Terran says she's just a girl, so what does she know, and Elanwy understandably wants to hit him in the face for it. The original version of this argument sounds like a believable interaction between adults, and that's kind of the problem, or would be a problem if this was the version of them and their relationship we were given. Because Terran is only 14 and Elanwy is only 12. Their relationship as friends, let alone love interests, being one that is immature and awkward and one that seemingly makes very little progress by the end of the film, is believable. It feels genuine. I am overwhelmingly more inclined to trust that adolescents would very quickly erupt into a fight and then just as quickly resolve it, or spend very little time trying to foster a romantic relationship despite their obviously mutual affection, because they are kids. More than just believable, it's consistent. The four protagonists of the film, Terran, Elanwy, Fflewddur, and Gurgi, are each introduced to us as a distinctly childish and innocent person in an otherwise fairly serious and perilous world. Terran daydreams of being a great warrior, spending most of the first 10 minutes of the film pining for the day he becomes the greatest hero in all of Prydain. When Elanwy finds Terran in his cell, she immediately asks in a very playful tone whether he's a lord or a warrior, as if they're playing a game, and it's never made clear either by her own elaboration or by her behavior whether she's actually a princess, or just pretending to be. When we're introduced to Fflewddur soon after, it's immediately made clear to us that he is playing pretend, his magical harp breaking one of its strings with each of Fflewddur's lies about his renown and talent as a bard. The few occasions throughout the film that do necessitate him to act like an adult being ones that he initially fumbles and stutters in response to. And when he finally does find his footing, the delivery of his lines along with his body language feel very much like a child that has worked up the courage to say what they think an adult would say. The one time in the film he successfully taps into and stays in his adulthood being when he quotes the only other adult characters he's met in the film as a rebuke to them. And finally, Gurgi, who spends the entirety of the film mishandling his excitement and affection for a new friend, misinterpreting and internalizing Taran's brief flashes of anger, and misunderstanding the worth of his possessions beyond his own limited scope, even trying to exchange an apple core for an ancient, all-powerful weapon of death. Neither Gurgi or Fluter or Eilonwy or Taran truly occupy a previously established trope within the Disney canon, and instead exist as youths in revolt against not just the Horn King's tyrannical grasp over Prydain, but against the generational expectations placed upon their young shoulders as well. The Black Cauldron's characters and the underdevelopment of them and their relationships are as defiant to the ideas of legacy and expectation as youth
it's our
is
generation.
to antiquity, or as a fire is.
I'd say it's every generation talking to the one before.
And now for my favorite part,
I'll
where
agree
I
to
come
that.
back to
Yeah.
the start and tell you why The Black Cauldron isn't just a Halloween movie, but why it's the best Halloween movie I've ever seen.
And these are a few of the things that I've got to get through to you.
Halloween is a festival of death, contrived as a bulwark against a creeping march of winter and the forces of decay that it brings. But to stay winter's tireless stride, the Gales knew what a lot of people, especially many of the executives and critics of the 1980s that The Black Cauldron premiered to, seemed to have forgotten. The only way to truly triumph against the unrelenting tides of decrepitude is to invoke their most resolute and uncompromising adversary: youth. Their immense bonfires and flame-adorned hearths, as well as the candles carried by the young to light their paths, were thought of as wards and harbors of protection against the encroaching, frigid waves of winter, paragons of the sun's powers and the properties of them: warmth, brilliance, and growth. And in this respect, I struggle to think of a greater exemplar of what Halloween truly represents than the Black Cauldron. Just as the Gales knew that the only means of defense against atrophy and the hastened approach of death was not just to pay reverence to their past, but to meet the advancing forces of ruin head-on with a clamorous cavalry of warmth and youth, so too did Joe Hale and the countless budding, bright-eyed artists that he stood at the helm of. Every pencil stroke, every paintbrush, every word, and every note of the Black Cauldron in its original form, and even more so in the maimed echo of it that we were given, embody, without a single instance of hesitation, not only the thematic properties of Halloween, but the spirit behind it. And it is with great ease that it meets all 5 of our criteria, or anyone else's that I was able to find, to be admitted into the holiday's celebratory cinematic canon. Its juxtaposition between the brilliant light and warmth of Prydain's forests, with their glowing landscapes of lush greens, argent yellows, and glistening oranges, accompanied by their scintillating soundscapes and gentle flutes against the suppressive darkness and the biting cold of the Horn King's keep in Morva, with their lurid purples, their fathomless blues, and their Stygian blacks, as well as their toxic greens and their tormenting reds, underlined by an unweary and at times screeching assortment of thundering horns, crashing cymbals, and wailing strings, perfectly reflect and embody the transition from autumn to winter in the endless conflict that these 2 seasons have always been entrenched within. The Black Cauldron's characters, in all of their childish stumbling, foolish bravery, and emotional regression, exist as gleaming reflections of the warmth and liveliness and youth that the Gales so long ago knew to be the only true defense against the cold and decay of antiquity. And they're complemented all the more by the film's own production struggles, not just in that the cut development of their personalities actually accentuates their childlike audaciousness and lack of emotional refinement, but in that the Black Cauldron itself's conception and unyielding struggle against both Disney's newly appointed leadership and timeless identity directly mirrors Taran, Eilonwy, Fluter, and Gurgi's youthful defiance to the decay and ruination of the antiquated forces that had pushed their world to the precipice of its doom. For a kingdom that was once the crowned jewel of the world of animation, an institution synonymous with not only joy but innovation, the Black Cauldron was a resounding charge against the decades of stagnation and cold and decay that had begun to suffocate the happiest kingdom on earth and drive its people from its lands. Most people like to say that the Black Cauldron was a film that almost killed Disney, and I used to be one of them. But now I know that I was wrong. In fact, I think it is precisely this heavy and dark and sinister and rebellious and soft and loudish and boisterous and dream-filled production that saved Disney from its own winter and ushered in a dawn brighter than anything that Walt and Roy or the Nine Old Men or Bluth or even the critics that so fiercely besieged it could have ever imagined. The Black Cauldron was the genesis of a renaissance, and although its chances of finding any box office success were crippled by the management above it, and even though it was kept from home video until 13 years after its release following Katzenberg's departure from the company, I think that the Black Cauldron unmitigatedly succeeded in what it set out to do. Taron and the film's supporting characters refused to conform to the formulaic, romance-obsessed films of Disney's past and the tired, coming-of-age abandonment of their fantasies that coming-of-age films were so insistent upon, electing rather to brazenly embrace their dreams and wielding their childish adoration of magical artifacts and the images of courageous warriors and exhilarant princesses and celebrated entertainers as a divining rod, managed not only to navigate through a perilous world of undying soldiers and grisly dragons and demonic kings, but they managed to become the very things they dreamt of or deluded themselves into thinking they would be as well. The Black Cauldron was its generation's Sleeping Beauty because its creators believed that it would be. It is a film that reminds us that our fantasies and our aspirations are things that do not have to be outgrown. We are not beholden to the structures or institutions of the past beyond whatever reverence we have for them, and nothing, whether it be the magical forces of an ancient artifact or decades of expectations bearing down upon us, can ever make us give up what we wish to become. And I can't think of a better holiday for it to represent than one that is celebrated by children and adults alike to, for one night, become who we see ourselves as when we glimpse into the scrying glass or gaze into a pool of oracular water. Nor can I think of a feature more reaffirming of the fact that our reflections are never really that far from what we dreamt of when we were young. Because when I was young,
When I was young.
When I was young.
When I was young.
When I was young.
When I was young. When I was young.
When I was young.
I wanted to be.
I wanted to be a herpetologist.
An aeronautical engineer.
This guy.
Myself.
I wanted to be a professional martial artist.
I wanted to be a fashion designer.
A detective.
I wanted to be a woman.
I wanted to be a filmmaker.
A therapist.
An archaeologist.
I wanted to be a mecha pilot.
I wanted to be a paleontologist.
I wanted to be a rock star.
I wanted to be a movie director.
When I was young, I wanted to be a storyteller. And now I kind of am one. Thanks to you. Happy Halloween.
Oh, that's touching.
It really is. It really is. So, coming back around to that, first thing I want to say is, number one, if anybody at Disney is out there, please watch this and take something away from it. Learn from past mistakes and embrace that need to create and innovate. And that same line can be said to anybody else who's trying to do a creative work. Anything you'd like to add?
No, honestly, I think everyone's touched it very well. Black Cauldron is just a movie that I'm very fond of, both as a kid and then more so as an adult now.
Yeah. I think that hits it right on the mark. Anyways, we're going to pop off for now. Hope everybody had a good time enjoying this writer's room. I'm Marcos Raid.
Maji Bob.
And you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.
Deuces.
Reactor online. Sensors online. Weapons systems online. All systems normal.